a bunch of game developers talking about game development stuff. Today we've got Yuri here,
Hi
who,
there.
welcome, works on Terraria, and I'm sure we'll talk about that quite a bit throughout the stream. And we got Jason Story again, who's always over the wrong. I can never point the right way. He's over there somewhere, and Andrew as well from Infinity PBR. So welcome, guys. Thanks everybody for coming out. Thanks everybody for joining us live. I forgot to send out an email and share this, so make sure that you go share it and send it out to all your friends, please, and hit the thumbs up button and drop a comment and say hello in chat. All right. Anyways, guys, I'm gonna take these off because as weird as they look on stream, make the whole world look really weird. It's really strange that the little magnifier on there actually works. So I've been using it when I'm playing around with the kid. The toddler really loves them. She thinks they're hilarious, and she likes to play science together. So that's her mixing up potions. But I'm shocked when these little decorative things actually work as glasses. Anyway, so on to game development stuff. Oh wow, they also work as a great hair pooper. Pull that right up. So how's everybody doing this week?
I'm doing great. Nice to meet you all. My name is Yuri Omer. Yeah.
Oh, and you're working on Terraria, right?
Yes, I am currently the lead programmer and team leader in Terraria under Relogic.
Which is, I'm sure most people watching this, probably 95% of them have heard of or played Terraria. I know most of my friends have played it. A lot of them are like, or at least were big Terraria addicts, including some of my kids. So it's pretty exciting and pretty cool to have you here, man. I'm sure everybody's going to have all kinds of questions for you about that as well while we're going along. So if you guys have questions for Yuri, start thinking of them or just drop them in chat and we'll hit them up later. What's going on with you guys, Jason and Andrew? Anything new?
Nothing terribly new. Just still doing streams, working on the game, I think I'm going to be building a new loot module tonight because I was working on my system last night, and then I drove over my friend's house, and I was on my way here. I was like, I gotta do this differently. This is good. I need to make this a module, share it with the world. So I think I'm gonna be doing that, and fun stuff. Basically, been enjoying all the streams I've been doing and moving forward with the game. Very good stuff.
Nice. So the loot module, and just for everybody that hasn't been watching, Andrew streams his game development of his RPG on YouTube, like live. You can watch and join and ask him questions and tell him all the things that he's doing wrong or right. It's pretty interesting stuff. Actually see the full process with beautiful art and everything as well. So the loot system that you're doing is like just something to deal with, like you kill an enemy and what items you get, or is it
sort
bigger
of
or more complex? What is this?
It's going to be a foundational module as part of my game modules that's on the asset store. I mean, all of them are intended to give you a jump start on specific systems without really being too opinionated with how you handle it from that point on. And so for the loot module, it's going to work with my items modules and the other modules to essentially allow you to more easily populate what might go into various loot boxes. And what might be on loot. So just think about individual items on the world, so that when you press the button, the play button or the populate button, or you call the method to essentially, hey, fill this box with stuff, it will do some math and fill out logically what it might be in there. But it won't always be the same thing unless you say this has to be in there, then it will. And it will work with the inventory module if you so choose, and it will definitely work with the items module. So it'll be a little easier to populate with just dragging, clicking, and selecting from a drop down rather than typing things in and stuff.
Just when you get to the algorithm portion of it, just do me a favor and give me a shout, because while I specifically terrible at math, I won't be able to help you coming up with good algorithms. What I will be able to help you with is that's a perfect example candidate for the strategy pattern. If you want to be able to swap out which algorithm you're going to be using, maybe you want to randomly weight them or have them distribute with X percentage in the box, or have this many of this and this many of that. You want to be able to have different ways of swapping that out. So just that one bit, I want to just make sure we put in a cool system for that one.
Absolutely. Feel free to call me too. Sorry,
Yeah?
feel free to call me too on that, because actually in Terraria on 1.4 update that we did in 2020, we actually rewrote the entire loot system in order to accommodate the bestiary, where you can see all the loot of all the enemies in the game and what exact percentages down to the fourth decimal you can
Oh, wow.
see in the game, and it also changes based on the context, because the game has different difficulties and different things drop at different rates on those, and the game knows to tell you what things drop when, and even if there are special conditions, like only if you're in this place, this thing will drop. So it's
Nice.
a lot of fun to work on. So I'll be happy to join in.
Yeah, I should definitely call you up on that because that's exactly the base concept of it. And last week Jason and I did an impromptu sort of, I don't know what you would call it. It's a stream where he basically helped me out with my code, and people really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I got a lot out of it. So I think we should do more of that as well. So it's fun.
And actually, on that note, because we were asking what we're up to, Jason, I just thought it was funny. I was working on a save system, just your standard. So basically, every so often, as people know, I now do a bit of YouTube from time to time, and so I've been.
Everybody
looking at
should go subscribe right now. The link's already in the description. Go check it out.
So I've been
Awesome.
looking at what topics I want to cover, and I was looking at saving, and I realized that I've not been particularly happy with the options or the tutorials out there for saving in Unity. If you do a search right now, you'll find, if you search Google, asset store assets come up first, which is fine. I definitely recommend if you don't know what you're doing with save system, pick something, use it, it'll get you started. If you are writing your own though, the two most common bits of advice you're getting are player prefs or binary formatter. Now, most people also here don't use player prefs for scale because that's not what they're for. They're basically true or false configuration data or whatever. But binary formatter is not only not recommended anymore, like if you type binary formatter into the Microsoft MSDN documentation, there's a big yellow banner that says, "Do not use this. It is deprecated. Stop using it. Please stop using it." It really warns you against it. And if you right now Google or go into YouTube and type save system, they're your two options. And so I kind of thought that's an interesting video to cover. So I've just been, before I can make a video on it, I have to make one. So I have to sit there and sort of figure out what I'm going to do. So I've been going through that process. And I found it funny that I stopped working on my save system, took a break, tuned into Andrew's stream we mentioned earlier, and he was working on a save system. And I was like, oh, look, there you go. It's exactly the same thing. I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
I just had to go look. I was curious when the last time I did a video on that was. I don't even remember what I did. It was very I did a live stream on it. Interesting. Oh, and one on yeah. I guess I haven't done anything on it in a long time either. I did one live stream 8 months ago.
Saving and loading is one thing that royally screwed me over when I made my first game, The Barbarian, because I went to the forums and I said, how do you save a game? I'm making an RPG. How do you save the data? I had no idea. I was using Unity script, all that stuff. And someone on the forum said, oh, use player prefs. And I looked at it, I was like, oh, so you just type that and they get that and then you can call it up. Okay, I can see how that works. So I just have to loop through all my data, make one line for every bit of data I want to save. All right, so there's going to be 4 saves, so I'm just put this and concatenate the string together so the key is always different for each save system. It's different string for each level. Okay, I can do this. And my entire game is saved with player prefs. And it was years later. I was staying at a Starbucks. At the time, my laptop was not able to run the game. It would crash. And so I was at Starbucks with my laptop just watching videos on YouTube, and I saw this live stream with Mike Geig and some other guy from Unity, and it was all about saving, and I watched it, and I was like, holy F. I was doing this wrong. And yeah, so don't always trust the forums. That's a lesson of the day.
Well, I mean, your player prefs, it sounds like it actually worked, though, right?
It did work. The game's still on the iOS store. You can, it works. It's just, the whole game, don't look under the hood. But specifically, that one topic was, I had to build the system that is, I don't know how many thousands of lines that loops through how many things in order to save all this data. It works. It does work. But it's crazy.
Yeah, and I think that the problem that I have too is if you look at the asset store, the assets that are there. So I don't want to get really too deep. I don't want to monopolize the topic, but the thing that interests me is that saving is like 3 parts. The first part is, what am I saving? It's kind of like the grab bag of how do I get all of the stuff in my game I want to save. And then the second part is, who do I give it to? How do I build a system where I now have all the stuff? How do I give it to something to do that problem without like writing nested references across all my code that's a mess? And the third one is, I have all this stuff now. What do I do? Where do I put it? And I find that the assets tend to solve that last one, the persistence layer. They will say, hey, you give me stuff, I'll put it somewhere, and if you ask for it back, I'll give it back to you. But they don't tell you, how do you connect that to the system, and how do you get stuff from your game in. And that's why the bit that interests me the most is convincing people that you treat those like separate problems. Have your objects say, oh, I'm a player manager, I have 3 things that are important: my position, my last waypoint, and my health, or whatever. Those are the 3 bits of data I have that need to be persisted. And rather than doing anything at all, they just store them in a box, and then somebody says, hey, what's your save data? And then gets it from it, and then goes, puts it somewhere, and then gives it back. So drawing that line is what I think is the bit that's missing most. And then on a completely separate note, on the other side, when it comes to saving files, people often stop at, I have data, I put it in file goes somewhere. They don't think about things like, what if the file format changes? Which they do all the time. You're going to add more stuff to your save game as new weapons and new abilities come up. And what happens? Does your game break if you retroactively have new data that your save files don't support the old one? So save file versioning is really important and should be included. And then we haven't even gotten into hashing and security for the save files. And what about the actual act of saving? You're talking to the file system, and what happens if the person runs out of memory, or the computer turns off, or something breaks? Have you now corrupted their entire save file? There's a solution for that using transactions and backup files. But again, none of this stuff is covered in most save file systems. So just going through the explanation of what are the other concerns to consider, I think is something that's needed, you know?
I definitely agree with that, and especially on the part where you have to manage the version of your saves, because on Terraria we already have version 240-ish of the save. The game has to last 10 years, and if you try and load the save from 2011, it should still work. And there's a lot of things that changed in that span of time. A lot of things have to get added. I do want to say that one thing that also has to happen with that save system is a lot of assets on the store won't tell you how you get the data back and actually make the game work with it, because as your game grows, it's very likely to have a setup phase that you're going to want to insert the loading of the data somewhere in the middle. And depending on how it gave you the data, it might be really problematic to say, okay, give me all the stuff I need and then do things with them. Because sometimes you may spawn things on the fly and you'll want to save those, but they don't exist in the scene initially. So how do you get them to say, hey, I actually existed, build me, and then give me all the data so I can load myself in? And that's one thing that I always struggle with, no matter what save system I try to write.
Yeah, because your options are either a giant file where you have to scan the individual parts, or you have to load the whole thing into memory, or you need to split it up into multiple files. There's a reason why a lot of big games, what they actually have is some sort of .back or .bat file or something larger, or some big system, which is actually secretly a zip file. Actually, if you unzip it, has a whole bunch of little files, because it's far easier to reason about files per section, per region, per whatever, in which case you can chunk your loading. I'm not going to cover that. That's too far for what I want to talk about. But it's, yeah, that there's a reason why it's normally split up more.
Well, I'm excited to see what you come up with, man. You got me thinking of ideas too. But I think that's a difficult topic, because it's like when you get down to, especially the restoring a state, and you're saying getting that all correct for your game is difficult, because the way that your game is set up, and most people don't even think about that stuff when they're starting to build it at first. They build it out and then try to restore, and everything falls apart. So I'd be really curious to see what you put together there.
Well, that's why, like, my main, I guess, philosophy for the channel is going to be that I think a lot of people worry too much about the lines of code. Like the example with the file system. You can really panic about, should I use JSON? Should I use binary formatter? Should I use XML? Should I create my own format? Should I use flat file? Should I use XAML? And it's like, well, does any of that actually matter? If you take 3 steps back and go, what are you actually saying? What is your intent as a programmer? I want to save stuff. I want to give it to somebody, get it back later. The important part, the part that you have to get right, is the conversation between whoever does the saving and the saving stuff that needs to be saved. All of those other things are called implementation details. And I find that a lot of conversation around complicated topics gets sort of caught up in the weeds. Like even all that stuff I talked about, hashing and security and versioning and all that, they're important. But if you have a good application boundary, which says here's data, load data, you can actually add a versioning later, or you can add multiple versions, you can swap out versions, or as I would recommend, you'd actually have version handlers. So this is the V1 processor, the V2 text load file processor, whatever, and then there's some process that says scan the file. If it's a V1 save file, hand it to the V1 processor. And so the point is that's scalable behind that boundary line. The part that's important is the boundary line. And I think that's the bit that is missing with a lot of these conversations, is people focus too much on, oh, I need raycasters here and I need this. No, what's your question? I want to, when button pressed, shoot something. Write that code. Write the abstraction of write your rule into the system such that you can swap out the pieces later.
Yeah, what do you guys do on Terraria for character versioning? I'm kind of curious. I've seen a couple different solutions.
Well, right now, Terraria uses a binary formatter, and we have the version saved at the start of each save file, so we know what we're about to expect. And as unclean as it is, right now it's a big save method, and it has a lot of if version under, do this, if version over, do that. And we try to make it sequential, so we know the file ends at this. You won't have any more information to save in the file, and we can sort of expect that's okay in case you open an old version of the game with a newer save, but it rarely comes up.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds similar. It sounds familiar to EQ2's character system. It was a lot of it would save off the version number, and it was binary. So it's kind of weird. Like you would think it was all in a database because it's an MMO, but a lot of the character data, not all of it, but a lot of the character data was actually binary serialized out into blobs in the database. It's something that I don't like to talk about because it makes me sad when I think about it. But if you would essentially get it all back and deserialize it, and you'd have the version number and do the same kind of version checks. There would be a character upgrade process when you logged in, and it would just go through and upgrade the character data and update the save for them. I think yours is probably a little bit different because you don't just instantly resave it, right? You save when they save.
We do actually see if the version is lower, and we resave it, so it's okay after. We do also have backups for the saves. Players and worlds are saved separately, so there's also the entire process again on the worlds. We did section these off, actually, in a big rewrite. So every part of the world file has its own chunk, and in case anything was wrong, we can kind of skip that chunk and try to fix it. So that's kind of nice.
That makes sense.
Yeah. One big advantage I actually want to bring up about that, when you do serialize the binary, it's very convenient to say later, also synchronize this by sending the exact same data, because you already knew this is what you needed to restore state, serialization as it is. But I do want to see what system you make, Jason, for handling saving to different formats, so it can be done like that conveniently.
Well, you and me both, because I'll be honest, like this is, I've said before, this is called the Game Dev Show. I've never called myself a game dev. I'm a system designer, and in general I work in enterprise.NET stuff, and I poke Unity from time to time. So I'm curious to see, before I do anything like this, part of the research phase is to just look at what other people do and find assets and find what the standards and practices are. So I don't know yet either. So far I just do the stuff I do know, which is file system access, transaction management, and all that stuff. By the time I start getting to chunking data and handling things that aren't just a standard SQLite database, I have some homework of my own to do. So I don't really know the answer just yet myself.
Yeah, I'd be really curious to see how you do the restoring state stuff.
I will say, though, one thing that is very, I think, missing for a lot of people who aren't familiar with serialization at a kind of lower level is all that serialization means is to put in serial order. I have a bunch of stuff. You have data about yourself, your name, your age, where you're from, whatever. All serialization means is put one after another. Make it something that I can send somewhere. And so literally, if you just wrote a line, which is your name followed by your age followed by your location, you've technically serialized it. And then what you can do with that is if you sent it somewhere and someone wanted to get it back, all they'd have to do is split it back out into the unserialized parts or deserialize it back into what it is. And so a lot of the systems that boil down to how do you save X is really the question, how do you serialize X? And if you want the most simple version of this, there's an interface in C# called iSerializer or iSerializable. And if you just have your object implement iSerializable, you get what's called a property bag. And a property bag is just something, and you've actually seen this before, especially with networking. It's the exact same thing that Photon uses for their transferring data, because again, serialization. You just send the data in order. It's like send an int, send a string, send a bool, send an int, send a bool. And then how do you get the data back? You do the reverse. Give me an int, give me a bool, but you have to do it in the exact matching reverse order. And if you do that, it doesn't actually matter where it goes, right? Once you've sent the data in serial order, somebody can take that data and squash it into a file, send it as a byte array. They can like write it out and then send it as a file. It doesn't matter as long as the rule is clear. If I give you these things in this order and I want them back in the reverse order, that's kind of the serial hard part of serialization. And so I don't know the full answer to how I will scale that in terms of chunking, but as a per object level, I do know that it makes the most sense just to say, I am a thing with 4 fields and I need to save those 4 fields. So I will give you my 4 fields in order and you give them back to me. And that way, later on, I can decide, how do I talk to this thing? Do I talk to its parent who talks to its children? Do I have it request the data only when it instantiates or whatever? They're all different questions. But the actual serialization part, funnily enough, is the easiest part of that question. It's just agree in the order you send the stuff back and forth. The rest of it's where it gets complicated.
Yeah, that's fair. Very.
Well,
It's actually kind of fun now. I want to do it too.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of dealing with some of this stuff right now in coursework and saving off optional data on things that need to persist and stuff. So it's kind of interesting. That's why I'm really curious to see what you do. See if there's anything I can snag and steal for my coursework that's interesting and useful. Yeah, I'm sure there probably will be something in there, at least something that I can refer to. Send people over.
I have to keep fighting myself though. I'm spending most of my time not doing the saving and doing like silly animation stuff. I think I was showing people earlier. I have like, I realized this is something I learned earlier today actually, or yesterday, is the video player in Unity has a opacity slider. I never thought about that before. It seems a bit silly to play video and want it at 50% opacity until I realized if I have a background of a color for the camera draw that's matching the same color as the video, I can then fade in the video and I can basically have transitions of fancy effects that don't require weird renderer code or fancy particle systems. I can just render a video out at a low enough resolution, make sure it loops in something like After Effects, drop it as a background for a title screen, and you have a really nice, fancy looking title sequence that doesn't require any processing outside of running some frames. And then you can like slide it up and down. So again, this is not a save system, but this is what I've been doing for my save system, building a fancy title thing, you know.
Yeah, well, the fancy title thing will get a lot more views too when you release the videos, right?
True.
To be fair, like the fancy flashy videos tend to get a lot of views if they're good and visual. They have character models in them. It's a lot better than if they don't have character models. And if you can make those out and stuff like that, it just tends to be more popular. Even, the detailed stuff is good, but I guess one of the things I would mention is like when you do your detailed one of your saving stuff, save something pretty, right? Save and restore the state of something that's visually appealing, right? People
Wait, you're saying my test scene of a cube and 2 spheres spinning is not going to be good enough for my save system?
I'm saying grab a Cinti pack and use that, right? It's a whole lot better. You'll triple the views just by using one of their art packs instead of your cubes.
Yeah, really, just save the scene in different positions in it, different rooms, entirely different thumbnails.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And Nicholas, thanks for the super chat. He just was saying thanks and asking more code reviews. So I think that is something we're going to do soon. It was something I kind of wanted to do this week, but I couldn't this week for sure. But I think we'll be doing them sometime soon. We're going to go through some code reviews, and I've got a couple that were submitted already that I haven't had a chance to dig into yet. So I'll probably sync up with Jason this week, and we'll take a look at those.
Just one note, because Jack asked a question about would you save using the version number first or the UID first or what order? So here's something. This is a tangent, but I think it's an interesting point. I used to have a very I don't like the word sacred, but a lot of people think about data as this, like, there is the JSON format, it is the JSON format, there's the BSON format, there is the whatever format. Everything is this like structured, rigid thing. Data is just, if you can spit it out into something, you can get it back later, you've done your job. There's a whole concept of lossy versus lossless and all that. That's irrelevant. My point is, if you saved a file and it's 20% JSON and 40% BSON, and and you've added a little bit of XML in there, that may be crazy to do, but if you can get it back, you're fine. Now, so let's look at the problem, not the format. If I wanted to version my save files, all I need is a version number. That's like the most important part. Give me the number 1, 2, 3, 1.5, whatever it is. So this may seem weird, but if you put that version number in the JSON object, you have to parse the structured data to get back where that is, which means you have to do the process of reading the file into memory to find the bit with the version number to do the bit you need to do. But what you could do, which just sounds really weird, is take result in your JSON file, do whatever work you want, get the JSON file, and just before you save it to a file, just prepend a version number as a string. Just first 4 characters, the first string with a space or something like that. Now, when you read the file in, if you're using something that reads files sequentially, you can actually just read the file, read the first line of that file. You don't need to read the whole thing in. Doesn't matter what format it's in. Doesn't matter if it's JSON, if it's XML, if it's anything. If the very first line before the line break on the first character is a version number, you can read it in, find out what version it is, find even the type. And this is why this is what's called a header, the top of a lot of files. Look at this web page, for example. It'll give you HTML5 or whatever format. There's usually a header line that's separate. And so if you add a header line to your file, it doesn't matter what the rest of it is. So I would add a header that says, this is a X file with, this format. And so I don't have to read the whole thing in the memory. I can scan the first line of a bunch of files, find all the ones, group them, sort them, do whatever I want. And then just before I try to deserialize it, just strip out that first line. Now you're back to normal, whatever format it was before. So that's not the 100% best way in all cases, but think in those terms, right? Don't think in terms of, do I bury this in the middle of my file or how do I manage it? If all you're doing is, can I detect what version this is? You could use it as part of the file name. You could literally have some format that's like a string. It doesn't matter what it is. Find some way for you to identify it. Unity, for example, it uses metafiles. It doesn't store it in the file. It stores it secondary. You could do that too. You could have a save file with a secondary file called file info or something, or a hidden file beside it. That's usually less ideal because people will copy and paste save files and forget the metafile, whatever. There's a whole different thing. But the point is, separate the concerns. If your question is, how do I version my thing? Is that the first question? Is the ID first or the version first? Probably the version, because you can't even read the file till you know what version the file is. So find some way to have that information. And my recommendation is just literally first line, read the string. Don't just read first entry in the first character set. What is it? Okay, cool. Now I can process.
So one thing came up that's actually a nice tip. I remembered as you discussed the serialization and what order to put things in. You mentioned to handle issues about characters not saving because the user ran out of memory. In Terraria, what we do is we save the entire file into memory first. We compare that it's okay. We still keep the old file. We try to save the new one. And if there's any issue, we try to save the old one just in case, so we don't corrupt the save. Just
so that's it. I did it slightly differently back at my project. So again, this is what's funny is, to me, we're talking about game dev, but from my experience, it was ingesting data sets. So it may sound like a different thing, but it boils down to the same problem. I was working with supermarket data, and supermarkets do what's called basket analysis. So every time you purchase something at a supermarket, it goes through this till and they bleep the stuff and whatever. And every basket contains this. They don't store who you are, but they would say a person bought these 10 things together with these prices at the time. These are the actual prices of the product versus this is what they bought them at, because prices of discount stuff change. And so what my job at one stage was to get all of this data, and you're talking 5 years of a single shop's purchase details, and scan it in, parse it, store it in databases, compare it against weather data, compare it against historical data, and have the store basically figure out, when do we sell certain things? What should we buy more of this? All these, it doesn't matter. Lots and lots of stuff. The point is, we're getting dumps of data from the point of sale systems from stores, and that's like a lot of information. And all of those problems exist. For people who don't know, if you ever work with vendors, for example, point of sale vendors, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of different companies that all provide to stores the ability for them to store their data. And they use different formats, and they're not consistent, and stuff changes. And so you're reliant on whatever weird ass format somebody gives you and hope that it's right. And oftentimes it isn't. And oftentimes people mess stuff up. So the chance that that file will break is pretty often. Now, we want to put it all in the database, but we have to read it in first, and it's coming in file format. So same problem. How do we load in stuff, make sure it doesn't break, make sure we don't kind of duplicate line items? You can't store the same thing twice because you misread the file. So our solution, very similar, but because the data sets are coming in hundreds of thousands of, like you can't store that all in memory and parse it and do different stuff. What we do is we'd drop the files into some directory. We had some Amazon web service that would then take the file, move it into the online buckets. You can basically have buckets of data. And then when you read the file in, we would save it locally on the machine, and we'd simply copy the file twice and give one of them a .back extension and then hide it. So in the directory, it still looks like one file, but the other file is still there, just cloned and with a .back. Then you do a transaction. You try to process the file. If at any point that file fails, you just go, oh, well, this messed up, and you delete that one, remove the .back extension, you're back to where you were. And it didn't cost you any performance memory or anything like that. And then what's cool about that is the external tool is actually reading that directory and doing the scans at all times. So you're trying to process it. If it fails, you just undo it and put it back. And you could even move it to two folders, like pre-process, post-process, and then failed. And if it fails, move it to the fail directory. And that way you have a history. You can just open the directory and go, these completed, these are ongoing, and these ones are had issues with them. And you can then go back and process them further. So in short, same idea, but when you're doing it at a scale, you're better off literally just like duplicating the file and hiding, put it away over there. And in the event that something goes wrong, just pull the file back.
Yeah. So one more thing about serialization that's actually really fun. We talked about save files so far, but there's actually other cases you can use serialization just for. We already talked about networking, where you just send things in serial order, so they don't even have to have a save file. You can just use serialization to send things to get them back in memory. But one other interesting case I can think of is that in Terraria, we actually have the concept of letting players create their own resource packs and replace the art and audio that's in the game. And we had to figure out a format where they can load all these files and order them and all that. We ended up doing the very easy thing and just using zip files initially. So you only have... Yeah, you'd only have a JSON file telling you the version, who made it, a short description, because that's nice, an icon PNG, and the folders that match the exact game folders, so players know exactly what they're swapping. And that ended up being really nice. The only big problem with that is having the asset repository system to figure out in what order you have to load everything. So you only load one thing in memory at a time, because resource packs can get gigantic. But that's a lot of fun in a topic to have.
The zip file thing is actually great. One thing, this is a fun experiment. I don't know if anyone else did this, but as a kid I did this a lot. I would constantly open up the discs, the 700 megabyte CDs that I had my games on at the time, and there'd often be some weird formats. There'd be some whatever it was, .dat, .back, .info, .save, .game, and I kind of learned early on that formats are arbitrary. Like once you start writing software yourself, you can call anything a dot whatever you want. Doesn't matter. There's no standard. .save doesn't mean all .save files look the same. They're just some words somebody called something. You're usually better off having unique ones, but you can call it whatever you like. You can have a format for your game. It helps you later if it's unique, because it means you can do other stuff with it. But anyway, my point is, if you have a format, just try opening it and stuff. I used to always try. I'd open the folder for the game. I'd try opening it as a text file. Oh, that looks like gibberish. That means it's probably binary. Then you try and open it with some kind of binary formatting reader. Or if that doesn't work, open it with a zip file. 7-zip's great, because 7-zip doesn't require you to know what format it is. They'll try their best to open any archive, whether it's zip or RAR or whatever. And so if you try to open any file in it, it'll let you know. And so that's kind of interesting. You can find out that a lot of file formats that you think are complicated are probably just a box of things. If you open it, there's just stuff inside of it. Normal text files and normal other stuff,
Yeah. Also, on these bags of things, in Unreal Engine, actually, when you put assets in a project, it actually wraps them in a UEXP and UAsset file, and they are just your assets with Unreal's metadata, like Unity's meta files. The exact same concept, different implementation, bags of things. Instead of open
Yeah.
bags, you just have
And
containers.
I think isn't it Unity packages the same? I can't remember that. Some of these I've done so many of these and opened them and different things have happened. There's certainly some Unity stuff that you can just open as a zip file. I can't remember which ones. But...
Yeah, it's the
Unity
Unity package
packages.
format, and it's a zip file that you can open in any application like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, now you guys have me thinking I need to redo my entire my entire save system. I don't know what's going on.
If you don't need it, you don't need it. Like this, again, we're talking about cases where it's like large scale, crazy stuff, right?
Well, I mean, the things like the versioning
eventually.
is. What's that?
I was saying, eventually you're going to get to large scale and crazy though with your RPG.
And the versioning, that's the thing that I hadn't thought of. And Uri, you brought up the idea of, okay, every save file from 10 years ago on still works. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. If you just have a bunch of methods of upgrading each version to the latest, then it doesn't really matter. You just write what you have a new version guy, write a new updater so that you just make sure every version does work. And I suppose you could even upgrade each version one at a time, so it just updates 20 times, so you don't even have to do, it just do the time to update that.
Yeah, that's fantastic to do. You do end up with a case that you run through 240 processes, and if anything breaks at any point, you have to figure out which one is it. So
yeah, that's always fun. Yeah, that's why having like a file-based processor is usually a good idea, where you do it transactionally. So whenever I say transactionally, what I mean is you start a process and you step through each one, and if it craps out, you can then do an unwind step or just throw it away, depending on what you're doing. I sent a link there, Jason. I was wondering if you could pull that up.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now.
Because William made a comment, and I just want to really highlight something, because this isn't like a passive. I really want to make this very, very clear to people. A lot of people are using, or there's guides for binary formatter. This is not a third-party website. This is Microsoft's MSDN documentation. And look what it says right there on the main screen under their documentation for their feature called binary formatter. This type is dangerous and is not recommended for use. And if you scroll down a bit further, it'll even have another big marker saying for the serializer, it is never safe when used with untrusted input. So that's just as a note. When people are recommending that, I don't anymore recommend binary formatter.
And just to be clear, that untrusted input is like anybody's save file, right? Because they can go in and modify it. And if I remember right, there was some hack in there where they could basically get admin access and
you can do DDoS attacks. Yeah, you can do so much crazy
by hacking
stuff.
the serialization there, by changing the data in there and having your code deserialize it and then get access to stuff.
Yeah, I actually deal a lot with modding different games, and I open the files and try to do different things with them. And one thing I learned pretty early on is a corrupt string can be really dangerous. You can actually make it execute any command you want, and that's actually extending even worse in systems that try to create data types for you as you load. For example, the JSON serializer tries to create any class that you tell it to if you use the type in the, inclusion in the data format. So you can tell it, create a new process of the command line with these arguments that will open the admin one that can call shut down the PC or open a calculator or anything. So you always want to check your data very, very carefully, and it's really difficult, especially when it's a string, because load the string, you already lost.
Yeah, so this is a general topic, and it's called an input sanitization, and it's really interesting because you'll be amazed how many ways people who know a small bit of computing can mess with systems that are badly written. Like one of them that a lot of people don't realize, especially if they're using languages that don't have robust APIs or libraries, is database access. So if you have like a database field and it's a bunch of people, and you have a search box which says search for person, and you just type in a person's name, If you're taking that string and in the background you're saying, oh, I'll just do a select query into my database, select star from people where name equals thing. That seems like a perfectly innocuous list, just a search box. If you know SQL, you can, instead of typing in the name like they want you to, you can type in what starts with an escape character, which basically says, oh, whatever string you're building, just stop building it. Now let's start a new one. Now you can write delete star from database where. And if you run that SQL statement that you just put in, somebody in the search box for your website can delete your entire database. So this is one of those
Happened
things
many
where
times in the past.
yeah,
Hopefully, like the defaults should make you avoid that if you're doing database stuff. But I've seen
there's
it
something
many
called
times.
parameters. Yeah, there's general SQL. There's database parameters that you wrap it and it'll do string sanitization and stuff. But that's just one example. Like there's so many ways. Like people don't realize too with websites and plugins and stuff. There's tons of websites that will inject JavaScript because all that a website is a big line of text, and some of that text is a script tag, and some of that script tag can have code in it, and that code can access your system and do all sorts of crazy stuff. So there's some really easy ways to inject code into websites and have like do whatever you want. And it may seem innocuous that, well, what can they do with some code on a website? Well, they can trick you into clicking buttons, or the moment you're about to do a purchase order, maybe the data goes somewhere else before it goes to the purchase order. So to you, nothing happened, but what actually happened is they captured all of your banking information, and they don't even need to do anything. They just have to wait for you to type it in and capture it at the right time. So a lot of this stuff gets really, really crazy when you start thinking about how much you need to distrust any incoming data. Yeah, crazy
How much
topic.
do you guys worry about that with Terraria, with people like hacking the save files and just using it to cheat or do whatever random stuff they want? Is it something you guys worry about at all, or?
So generally what we try to do is make sure the players can keep playing, because the worst part you can have is playing a game for 5 years with your favorite character and then finding out, oops, the save broke. Beyond that, anything is... we don't like exploitation, but like, it's a game, have fun. We have a public release of Tmod Loader, which is a mod to load other mods on Steam, and we embrace modders. I actually sit with the modders in the collaborators Discord, and they send me issues and things that they'd like to be changed to make the game easier to mod. And once in a while, we do a pass on that and put everything they ask for, or what we can, in a reasonable amount of time. So not very concerned, but we do want players to have the fun, so we make sure it's safe enough that it works.
Oh, I'm much more worried about just keeping it stable and keeping them from losing stuff, which I think makes a lot of sense for most games. I think people often worry too much about somebody cheating and spending way too much energy on that instead of worrying about the more important part of them not losing their stuff. The worst is when they lose their shit because you're trying to prevent them from cheating and their data gets lost.
Yeah, that's really only a problem with always online games, that players can affect each other. And honestly, if you work with C#, you already lost, because the game can just be decompiled, and all your save sanitization and all your encryption can just be read out and re-executed. So
yeah, if you're going to do multiplayer and it's going to be online, you just got to follow the rule of never trusting not just the input, but the client at all. Like, you can't trust anything that comes from them. Just assume it's always lying.
But you do bring up a good point, though, with that one. It's so I've actually, I get this question from time to time, and funnily enough, somebody I know asked me this very question about a game they're currently working on. What should they do to secure it against attacks and things like this? And you bring up a good point that for all this stuff, this is a fun conversation, and it's one of those things where if you're doing banking software or something big, you do want to make sure people can't change the numbers. But a game like, does it matter really if somebody is in a single player experience and the way they have fun with your game is to mess with it and mod it and do crazy stuff? As long as it doesn't impact other players, let them at it, right? So it's one of those things to I was asked, what would you do to secure it or protect it, or do you do different DRM solutions or whatever? And my general advice is, don't waste your time or theirs, or like, it's not worth the energy, because what's most likely to happen is people will play with your game, they will hack it or mod it, they'll make funny videos about it, which will drive traffic, which will make people interested, which will make people buy your game. More often than not, it'll probably benefit you rather than cost you. There are circumstances, and multiplayer is a different beast altogether. But if you're just making a single player game, don't bother with any of that. It's just not worth it.
One thing that is bother doing if you give up on the aspect of letting people edit the files is that you do want to include some hash of the build that you're running so that you know if it ran with modifications in case you get a bug report. Because we, without any joke or circumstance, we got multiple bug reports where it literally cannot happen in the base game. And we only found out after we asked like a series of more than 100 questions, figuring it out. They modified the game without telling us. And sometimes that's even more fun when you discover that the game was pirated to a degree. So you see that different hash, you already know, it's that build.
That's awesome. I hadn't even thought about that. That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. I just put that hash in there, you catch it, and catching the pirates. So there was a question for you, Yari, about Unreal 5. What you think of it? I was kind of curious. Is it something you played with yet?
I played with it in a limited degree. I gave it like 3 days just to see what I can try and have fun with. And I absolutely love their new Lumen lighting. That's just the dream of having an emission mask on a character and it just lights up the scene. That's so great. I really wish Unity had that. And it does have its global illumination thing, but it's not nearly as nice. The other stuff like the animation drivers they added and that big demo with the high quad. I forgot the names. I'm really sorry about that. But all the systems they added there are just fantastic, and it's amazing that they managed to make it run with current popular hardware, which is like a big thing I always keep getting concerned about. Oh, look at this amazing feature, and it probably can't run on 90% of PCs. But no, this actually just works on the most popular hardware you can find on Steam Survey or all that.
Does it require a 3090?
Yeah. Speaking of a 3090, mine is in repairs.
Oh no! I was about to ask you what it is you're running on hardware-wise.
So right now, I actually bought an entire new rig at the end of last year because mine was getting old and I needed a lot of upgrades to run things in a sane speed. So right now I'm running a 3070 because the 3090 is being fixed. It crashes randomly and it's really frustrating. I run a 10900 Intel CPU and basically all the high-end stuff. I have 128 gigs of RAM and I make sure to use them.
What about hard drives? Some
so I use NVMe. I have 4 terabytes in total. So
is it a Samsung Evo?
Yeah, I think so.
That's the gold standard for SSDs. If you want a good SSD,
if you're gonna have that much RAM, I would have expected.
I actually have this one too, the external one, just so that I can save files that I'm not accessing regularly and just take them with me.
I have one of those too, but mine's a big chunky one here, and that's my external drive.
Always have them handy.
That's great. So, do you find that you use much of that? Use that RAM a lot? You said you had 156 gigs.
28, but
128.
So I had a habit when I had only 16 gigs to try and close down everything regularly, but it's really annoying to reopen your workstation every time that you want to do something. And if you want to try and say compare Unity projects because one system you wrote in one place works and the other one doesn't, then it's nice to be able to open the 2 projects at once. And if they may be big, then well, you want that memory. Videos also tend to take a lot, and if you try and write your own processors for certain data types, it's nice to be able to just have a lot of things in memory and just not worry about it.
Yeah.
And in my case, sometimes I want to have more than 2 Chrome tabs, and so you're
gonna open a 3rd Chrome tab. Fair enough. Yeah, I like to have a lot of RAM too. I've had some projects where they take 20, 30 gigs just having the project open in Unity. So it comes in really handy. It's just rare that I find other people that actually get use out of their RAM. So it's nice to hear.
So here's a fun thing about RAM. Do you ever use edit and continue in Visual Studio? Or
Not
rider?
anymore. No, not
So
since I've been doing Unity development. Pretty much never.
So when we work on Terraria, we actually have this case where we'd like to edit particle systems, but we don't have a fancy editor like Unity that we can just do it on the fly. So we have to do it as the game runs. And one thing that's very convenient to do is to just pause the game, edit some values, click continue. One thing that a lot of people don't see about that is that when you try to do that with certain applications, the entire application memory gets duplicated until you close down the application. So you can just see the RAM amount jump 5 gigs over for your 5 gigs app for changing one number in one method and pressing play on the fly.
I never even thought about that. I wonder if that was happening before. I used to use it all the time with Unreal, edit and continue nonstop. It was like how I coded when I started out. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I'm not sure if it's something global to all applications, but I like to write decryptors for data sets for many games. I actually have a repository about something I did recently regarding game audio for a certain thing, and as I was working on it, I had like a case where I was just editing the data, trying to make them look correct because something wasn't right. And I just watched my memory climb and climb and climb. And I was getting like really fearful that I'm just going to have to crash midway and have to do it all over again. So it's nice to have a lot of memory when you work on certain things like that. But you should really never reach this case.
Yeah, I found game devs and video editors are like the only people who seem to really want to have a ton of RAM. Regular business development stuff, it's really, really rare that you hit that much RAM. But with games, like you find these projects where they just got tons and tons of crap in them. Do you hit RAM issues, Andrew? Oh, go ahead, Jason.
I was just gonna say, like in my case, you're 100% right. It's the Adobe suites. Like if I'm being jokes aside, like if I'm working on some project, it's going to be After Effects is open sometimes for stuff. Premiere is always open. If I'm doing custom graphics, Illustrator's open. If I'm modifying stuff, Photoshop's open. And so like each one of these are going to kill it. And then if I'm doing a Unity thing, I have to capture Unity footage. So Unity's open to capture it, to then record it, to then move it into Premiere, to then like it just all of these different apps. And yes, I could close them down and only use the ones I'm using at a time. But all of these apps take 30 seconds to a minute to open, even with full hard, SSDs and all the magic and all this stuff. So you're just better off, like I demonstrated in that video, is I use multiple desktops. I just have modes. So I just like swipe the entire desktop left. I'm now doing video editing. I swipe it right, back to Unity, I do some recording. And so the cost of the extra RAM saves not minutes, but hours. And so like financially it's worth it and it saves you time. And in the long run, it's a benefit.
I don't pay attention too much to the RAM. I always, whenever I use Macs and the iMac, you can get aftermarket RAM just fine. So I always load it up. I think my current iMac is 64 gigs. Don't pay attention to how I use it, but I know I am using the Adobe software, using Unity and Substance as well. Substance Painter is big, and I don't quit them if I don't have to. So generally, it's not an issue. But things do get slow after a while. I'm not sure if it's the RAM or other things going on, but I don't pay too much attention, but I always get more than I think I need.
Well, to be fair, 64 isn't a small amount of RAM. Like keep in mind, 4 to 8 used to be the standard. So like 64 is loads. Like most people, that's the average person won't go past 8, maybe 16. And so even like I don't really need more than 32, really. I want it and I can afford to get it, so I mean I'm going to use it. But I could probably live with just this mild hiccups at 32, or maybe even 64.
I just looked. I've got 32 enabled. There's 64 gigs in there, but apparently 2 of those sticks are not working for some reason, and I didn't even notice. So, just that I haven't opened the giant projects in a little while, or I would have noticed that right away. 64 is a good number, though. I need to get back to that. I got to figure out why those aren't on.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, especially with the era where all those 8K textures are becoming a thing. When you think about it, every time the texture resolution doubles, we use quadruple the memory in case of a bad compression. So,
well, hey, here's hoping there's that new stuff. Anybody who watches the 2 Minute Papers channel, there's some crazy stuff coming where like you don't actually need high resolution stuff at all. You set a render target for how good it should look. You have a low res texture and you have it upscale it, but it doesn't just upscale by like throwing some pixels at it. It's actually like it makes something look identical with actual less memory. It's crazy. Like some of the stuff that's coming soon, we'll be able to have stuff that looks photorealistic and it stores like in bytes. It's crazy. It's crazy stuff.
Do you actually read the papers after you watch the videos?
Oh God, no! God, no! Again, math. I am so bad at math. I can't stress this enough. People think you need to be good at maths for programming, and I can barely do like standard school trigonometry. I can get by. I know the questions I need to ask, and I'm good at googling. But if it goes past, as soon as you start putting squiggles in your expressions, I'm out. Just nothing means nothing to me.
So, actually, before I hit this question, there was one down below, Jason. Somebody was asking about the multiple desktops and how you do that. But I wanted to pop this up before I lost it. Can you tell everybody how you do the multiple desktop switching?
Yeah. So since Windows 10, a lot of people don't realize that's like I think even 7 might have had it. I know it came in definitely in for 10. There's just multiple desktops. It's just part of Windows. It's not super highlighted as a feature, but the Windows key has a bunch of shortcuts. So Windows key W, Windows key Control, back and forth. Just Google it. Just go multiple desktops, Windows, and if you're on any modern operating system or any modern version of Windows, it's probably inbuilt. And then all you do is you have multiple screens, and every time you press left or right, it just jumps the entire desktop from one screen to another, and all of the tab icons get moved back and forth. So you would just basically open one app full screen, switch to another desktop, open another app full screen, and now you can press a button, and rather than having to minimize and maximize, you press one button, swipes the whole thing left or right. So.
Yep. I try to use it. I always just forget that I set it up. I'll set it up, and I'll use it for like a day, and then I'll forget about it, and then like a month or two later, I'll set it up again. So I got to get used to that. But I want to jump onto this question real quick. It said, "Hi, Jason. I'm 21 with an applied science degree looking to get into the games business. What are the differences between working on my own project versus going to game school to get experience? Thanks." So I thought this was kind of a broad question that everybody might have a little bit of thought on. So if you already have the applied science degree, I mean, the differences are really just going to be how directed it is and how you make the connections. Because if you go to a program like that, I guess I'll just leave this up. If you go into a game school to get experience, you're going to have a very, ideally, assuming a very structured program that's going to take you step by step through how to learn the game part or the game development part. And you're also going to meet people through there. I assume you'll meet, professors and other people that are going into the game industry at that game school. Working on your own project, you can do things, I'd say, probably a bit faster, but you've got to be a lot more self-directed, and you're going to have to get out there and make those contacts yourself. You're going to have to find alternative ways. And even going to a school, though, to be fair, you're not guaranteed to make any contacts that you keep in contact with and that are valuable over lifetime. It's just one of the options and one of the possibilities. You still have to go there and actually take advantage of it. You've got to go to the extracurricular type stuff that they have, the groups and things, and meet and talk to the people if you really want to get the most out of it and get kind of the big benefit there. That said, though, I didn't go to a game school, so I got my degree in electronics, totally, completely, utterly unrelated, and learned all of my coding on my own and from other people. So just throughout the process of taking classes online and random things, reading lots of books and learning from other people, and in the process of just building things over many, many years. So that's, I just wanted to
and again, just for context, I
Go
actually did go to college specifically to learn game development. I have a degree with game development in the title, and I have never worked technically in the games industry at that scale. I've worked on indie games for people I know, but I've never done worked on a AAA title or anything. So it's kind of arbitrary, right? Just it's whatever works for you.
But what do you think the difference is between that and working on your own project to get into game development? What would you recommend there? Would you recommend they go through, if say they've already got an applied science degree, 21, so I don't know if that's a 2-year or 4-year degree there at 21. This could be either.
My advice has
would
always
you
been the same.
recommend doing there?
I always find that the problem. I'm not a super fan of this question. We get a version of it a lot because I think it comes down to what is the cheat code or shortcut path to get me to the job I want. And I've been of the belief, just get good at the thing you want to do, and then one of the things you earn the right to do as you get better at something is start being picky. And so I don't really look for specific jobs I want or things I want to do. I just keep trying to get better at stuff and work with people. And over time, people ask you to work on things, and it eventually gets to the stage you start getting people offering you jobs that you didn't think you'd even get if you applied for. And it's like, oh, that's cool. And then you start getting lots of those offers. You're like, oh, I guess I've reached the point I can start being choosy about this. So I think it may not be the best advice for everybody, but for me, I don't think racing to a deadline or trying to hit a certain path is as valuable as just really try to get good at something. And once you are good at it, you will find yourself in situations with fellow like-minded people. You'll find yourself knowing people who know people. At some stage the connection will be made. And I think it'll be easier for you if it's just because you're naturally working on stuff like that, you know.
I want to bring up another option too, because it's something that I think people ignore or forget about too, which is like so working on your own project's good because it gets you the benefit of you can show something to people. And if I see somebody who's like built a game or gone to school to build games, I'm gonna lean towards the person who's built the game, right? Because they've got the experience of it, not just I assume that they've got all the stuff from the school part too. That they've learned 90% of that are the important parts that they needed to actually build the game. So there's definitely some benefit there, but there's also a lot of benefit in working on someone else's project, joining somebody else's small team startup that's building a thing, and contributing there and learning that way. Because you get the benefit of it's a little bit easier to get onto something, and assuming that the project lead and the team is good, it's a lot easier to be successful with it, get it done and released. But you also make a lot. I mean, if you're going to do a good job, if you're going to do a shitty job and slack off or something, don't do this. But if you're going to do a good job of it and actually be into it, you'll make a lot of connections, and I found you'll find a lot of more opportunities that way. I've almost always, when joining like some little project or some little thing, even if it's just like a weekend hackathon, but especially on the bigger ones where they're like, hey, I need help for this month, or hey, we're building this thing, I've seen myself and other people just get jobs and offers and contacts and good friends along the way as well. But I think that it's a really good an option to at least consider. Like, find somebody's project that's active, or somebody that you know that's doing the same thing, that's working on a project, and join that. Or ideally somebody who's already in the industry and working on something on the side. That can be a great way into like just kind of joining in on those projects. But I know it's not really directly on the question, but it was something that's been kind of on my mind lately. Anybody else got any thoughts on this?
So I do want to say that going into a gaming school can actually open up a lot of connections, like Jason mentioned. One of my friends actually is in a game development course, and he ended up becoming a team leader for a project. And now he has to pick his members, and they have this whole presentation on what they're planning to do and what they already made to show that. And it's really nice and gets to boost a lot of confidence, potentially. But if you have applied science and you want to work on your own projects, it's best that you are able to show what you made in a way that people understand, because you can say that you understand the laws of the universe, but no one actually cares if it doesn't get their character to jump. Sometimes. So make it presentable if you choose to work on your own.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry, guys.
I was just gonna say I don't know what an applied science degree is specifically, but it sounds like maybe you can get a nice job if you're 21, maybe do a few years learning how to be in the workplace, making some decent money perhaps, work on your own game on the side, and then not only will you get the experience working on your own game, you'll figure out if you really enjoy working on your own game, because now you're doing it at night when you're kind of stressed out and tired. So if you can do it then, you can do it anytime. And then after you've worked for a few years in the industry and made a little bit of money, if that degree can make you a little bit of money, it sounds like maybe it can, then you might be in a really good position to do something else.
Yeah, and on the portfolio building thing, I cannot stress this enough. This is one of those things that it takes a lot of a hard time to learn. there's a level of ego in like, I'm trying to build this myself. I'm trying to learn how to do a thing. And so I will do all of it. I will paint the pixels myself. I'll build the characters myself. And you end up with this blocky, horrible thing that, quite frankly, you're not an artist. You may have spent 6 years learning programming. You didn't spend 6 years learning art like the person beside you who's an artist. The problem is, though, that's the brutal truth. When people look at your project, they don't see the code, they see the art, and then the code just happens to make it dance, right? So what people might feel off about effectively demonstrating a project where 80% of the visuals are not theirs. Like, oh, you just bought a visual asset pack and then wrote some code. It's like, yeah, but you're not showing off the visual assets, you're showing off the code. And so don't let your lack of artistic ability be a hindrance. So put all ego aside or all worry that it feels bad about using someone else's art. Get an asset pack, slap some pretty images on it, and then write the character controllers and the abilities and the whatever. And so it looks like a real game. Because if even if the code is the best code ever written ever in the coolest character controller, but it's a capsule that slides around a bit, it's not going to be very impressive. And I've seen this firsthand with so many different examples where people have really, really good code and it just doesn't sing, right? There's nothing visual or impressive about it. So just bite the bullet, pick an asset. And people are like, well, what about the money and whatever? The amount of additional benefit and eyeballs and people that will watch and engage with your content if you spend between 30 to 100. That may sound like a lot if you're looking for work, but the difference between putting up something that's not impressive versus putting up something that's like $100 worth of someone else's art, then your code is going to get you so much more engagement and likelihood to get work from it.
There were a couple more interesting questions that have been popping up that I want to just run through. I realize like they're just kind of flying in. First was just one for Yara. I'm kind of curious about because you're not using Unity. So what's it been like developing Terraria for different platforms?
So we started off with Terraria on just Windows, and the first step that would have been easiest was to port it to Mac and Linux. And for those, since we work with XNA, which is essentially a black box these days that you don't have any support for because Microsoft dropped it, we had to go with other solutions. So there are community-managed FNA and Monogame. We ended up with FNA for our Mac and Linux builds. We don't actually work on any other platforms. We only do the personal computer ones. So that's offloaded to another company to do the work on, and I can't comment on it. With FNA, we had some struggles with getting the rendering to work just right due to minor differences, but it's essentially boiling down to you just make different project configurations and give them different if-defs, and you can just add the code where it needs to be to make things run right again. Where there was barely any need to make a layer of abstraction for certain features, but we did end up with one for the different platforms copy-paste functionality because we let the player copy things into the clipboard. So that was a bit interesting. That's about it.
I'm kind of curious. We've talked about this a little bit before, and if you're not allowed to share it, it's fine. But you guys have a Linux build. Do you actually see a good number of Linux players? Do you think that was like a worthwhile thing, or is it more of just like
so I wouldn't be able to tell you because I don't get to look at the numbers. I get to look at the code and what's called the dev cave. Go back to the cave, make stuff.
Kind of curious. It's one of those things I always wonder about because I know, like on our games, the ones I've worked on in the past, like Linux was less than 0.1%. So I've always just been wondering, like if there's ever like a situation like, oh yeah, Linux is huge for us. There's another question just kind of for everybody, which was why do most people hate graphics programming, like shaders and stuff? For me, I'll answer it. It's because it's different. It's because it's not the same as the rest of the programming. So it feels like you're doing something very different. The interesting thing that I noticed early on in my game dev career was there was a couple guys, especially my buddy Sean. He really liked graphics programming, and he would look at it. He would look at the shader code. It all made perfect sense to him. And then he would look at my inventory code and he would go, I don't know what the fuck any of this means. Like, this is so confusing. And I would do the exact same thing at his. And like, we both just totally, I guess, understood things very differently. So it Yeah, it's I think just a different mindset. So I don't think that I guess most people, I don't know, maybe most people do hate it. What do you guys think?
So I probably am not a good person to answer that because I actually work with shaders and it's kind of my hobby. So basically, I can comment that shaders are very different. It's like the same question of, are you a person who understands quaternions or not? Because when you work on a shader, you're essentially saying, take all this data, make it look nice for me. And when you say make it look nice, you're basically asking a lot of different results to produce something satisfying. And it's not always as intuitive as it sounds. You don't intuitively think that a multiplier between two numbers is going to get you shades of lightning, or depending on the angle of the normals of the mesh and the light sources and all that. So if you're working with shaders, you're going to have to learn an entirely different language, how to bring data from your game engine of choice into the HLSL, and then if you need to, maybe bring some information back. And it's not as intuitive because you can't share the code. Most applications, you write a method once and you can use it everywhere. But once it's on the GPU, you can't actually do that. They are written in a different way. So if, for example, you make water waves in an ocean and you want boats to be displaced on that, you actually have to have the code in two separate places in order for the things to match. And that can be very different. On the topic of shaders, I actually am running this Unity background in a project that I built specifically to have fun. And I started off trying to make it with a PlayStation kind of theme, PlayStation 3. And I ended up making this. And it's the waves of light, kind of like how they had it in the home menu. And this is effectively just signs upon signs and cutting off the proximity of how every pixel on the screen is compared to where the sign ends up to make it brighter or darker. And depending on if it's close, I just make it bright and colored. And I can also change the colors because it's just some number I pass in for what color I want to see. So there you go. I can even animate it if I need to.
It looks great.
Thank you. There we go. Now it's changing over time without any input.
Nice. Yeah, it looks really good. I always struggle just even figuring out what's going to look good. Like once I figure out how to do an effect, I'm like, well, I got the effect done, but it looks terrible.
That's always been my problem. I can't. I went through a series of hobbies of various different things, and I kind of learned this lesson just around before college. Was I got into video editing, so not just editing stuff that we're doing here, but the example was the VFX and compositing. So you're talking lightsabers and all the other silly stuff that is fun to play with. And anybody who's into that might know the name Andrew Kramer. He was the guy I used to follow for those guides. But I learned a valuable lesson. I could follow the tutorials. There was just numbers and applying different layers of adjustments and all this different stuff. But what I realized is I don't have an eye for. I know what I want to appear. Like I could visually describe that nice sine wave combination of stuff, and I understand what sine waves are. I understand mathematically the basics of how that would apply, but getting from one to the other is just a chasm I can't cross. And I've had that problem with any visual medium where I can describe what I want and I can write code linearly, but to kind of artistically curve code to match a visual is something I could never achieve. And so I had that problem across all mediums. So whether it's shaders, whether it's video editing, if I have same with Photoshop, and any of the artistic side of that, it doesn't work for me. And it's really frustrating. So I end up leaning towards things like UI and UX design because that's so much easier. There's just a set of color rules. You apply the color rules, things look nice. That stuff isn't difficult compared to mathematically trying to turn words into pretty stuff and then picturing, I wish that was brighter, and then trying to establish what part of that would lead to that part getting brighter. And there's that disconnect is impossible for me to cross.
Yeah, I guess this is kind of one of these things where it's basically getting comfortable with the data, and also the syntax is a big barrier when you try to figure it out. One extra thing that's very frustrating when you get started with working on shaders is that When you have a code that has no visual and you're saying, okay, let me visualize the data so I can see what's going wrong in every step, you can't do that with breakpoints in a shader because the shader applies a million times to the entire screen. So you lost that capacity. And then if there was no visual and you added a visual, well, there you go. It's a visual representation of your exact problem. But you also can't do that in a shader because every single pixel does the exact same thing. Where do you put the visual to present the problem? So you kind of have to mangle it directly in the code, and it's very unclean to try and do that. So it can be a source of frustration. I actually end up with a lot of cases where I just do show red color in the spot that I am suspecting is the problem, and it's a process.
Well, that's even a good idea with UI stuff. I've said this before. If you ever find yourself debugging user interface stuff in Unity, start with rectangles. Put a big blue rectangle where that's supposed to be, put a big red rectangle where that's supposed to be, and then as you start to figure out what's clicking, what's showing, it's much easier. But yeah, the UI side of it's so much easier for me. It's an interesting topic. I think we brought it up before, but I think it's a lot to do with the fact that I'm aphantasic. So I don't know if we have discussed this on the show before. It's basically some people have really vivid mental images. They can sort of picture something. The classic metaphor for this is, or the example is, if someone says picture an apple on a table, and some people like myself are like, I know what an apple is, I know what a table is, I conceptually understand that, but I don't see it. Other people will see an actual table that they know with an actual apple that looks a certain way. They could describe the rivets and shapes of it. My brain doesn't work like that. I understand the concepts and I can apply them like a template. But for some people, their brain will start picturing it in vivid detail just by the thought of mentioning it. And so, yeah, I think certain minds are built better for that approach.
Those people are weird. I mean, but that's most people. I'm the same as you. I can't do it. It drives me nuts. Every time people do it, I'm like, I don't get it. Like, I struggle so hard to like visualize what something's gonna look like. I have to see it.
That's why someone mentioned Freya Homer and Shader Forge when that was first came out. That for me that was hard to understand, right? To get my head around what is these shader things. I didn't even know what shaders really were and all this stuff. Then once I started realizing, I can just plug this here and that changes it in that way. Oh, so it's just math that does this. It changes the way I understood things. Now, I still could never code a shader by hand, but visual graphs have been far easier to wrap the head around when making shaders. And then it really just to try something out and just to see what happens and be blown away by it. Whoa, that gave me an unexpected result. How can I use that?
Yeah, visual scripting for shaders is actually fantastic, and to get to see that in every step is great. The one problem I have with that is that we're still limited to the 0-1 range. So if you have values that are beyond that, you're basically screwed. One problem I had with this shader behind me as I was making things is that I ended up having negative alpha at certain points, and that would just invert the color. And I never knew the negative alpha can actually do that, because you'd think the alpha is 0, it's transparent. Well, no. And you don't get to see that in the visual steps because it's black. So there's a question here, Jason.
Yeah, I just popped it up. Who wants to read it?
If anyone knows how to implement a movement system based on click to move and keyboard movement, same movement with camera rotation, please give some tips. Now, I actually saw this in the chat and I thought to myself, Jason Story's voice is in my head now saying something along the lines of, it doesn't matter, make a system that says move, and then figure out how to move after that.
That's funny. I read that and I was like, that's two problems. One is, how do I make a thing that moves? You make a thing and you give it a position, or you give it a vector to move in direction or something, and that you're done. That's step one. Step two is you take some input, you turn it into a vector, or you turn it into a position. That's step two, and then apply different combinations together, and that's your answer. So yeah, full marks. That's what I would have said.
To go a bit beyond that on the nitty-gritty, so when you talk about camera relative positioning, there's actually the concept of transforming your vector to match the camera-specific direction. And then if you want to make it work with the floor, you just, there's a method called vector project on plane, which will just eliminate an axis that you don't want to have. And after that, you get the direction that you actually want with the camera. So look these up. It should probably solve your problem.
Yeah, there's a whole load of stuff in transform that's worth playing with. Like you can transform point, transform vector, transform direction. Basically, anytime you have a thing and you want to display it in the space of something else, like you can just take the concept of up and you can ask an object, what does up look like to you? And oftentimes when you're doing camera stuff, what you're saying is, I want to move forward. What is the forward of the camera? How do I apply that and make my forward equal that? So it's usually about transforming those vectors.
So I want to jump in on the separation part here, because I think that most likely the hardest part here is dealing with, you've got a nav mesh agent moving a character around, and then you've got a character controller reading inputs moving a character around. And they're probably both right now, at least from what I kind of loosely saw in the chat, they're both kind of competing for which one's going to go, and it's kind of alternating between the two. I think one option that I would consider is to, instead of having either one of them directly move it, have them essentially have the nav mesh system be feeding in the destination where the character controller wants to move, and feeding in the inputs to your movement system to move it as if it were like a player input, and sending those in. So having a layer that's handling the movement, kind of like what Jason was saying, having a layer that's handling a movement, and then having the input system or the navigation system pass in the data on how to move. And to do that, like with a simple nav mesh agent, one of the easiest things to do is just have an object that's actually moving with the nav mesh agent, and then have your character just follow it. It's like one of the simplest things. You'll see a lot of solutions for it where a nav mesh agent moves around, and then the character just aims towards the thing, turns towards it, rotates, and then keeps its velocity basically on or off, or speeds up or down based on that.
And what's really good about that is that works for things like tanks. Like if you have a tank and it's got a treads, and you're trying to do all the complex calculation for like climbing over terrain and doing weird stuff, you can try to use a nav mesh, and then you get that weird scenario where it starts rotating oddly with the nav mesh, and it's very hard to tie those two concepts together. But as Jason said, like if you have a tank and it moves in a direction, and then you tell it to just follow an invisible nav mesh agent, you'll get all the pathfinding for free. I bring this up as a project I made years ago. This was me playing with this exact concept. I just have a cube, it can move, and then I give it different strategies for how it moves. And so it's a bit janky. It was a prototype I did for myself, not for any real purpose. But the idea is, there is a thing, I want it to move, I should be able to hand it a way in which it chooses to move, and it's irrelevant. And each one has different pros and cons, and visually looks different. Sometimes you're using nav meshes, sometimes you're not. And so it's less about, obviously this isn't a particularly pretty example, but the point is, they're a different problem. I know when I click, I generate a vector, I tell something, this is where I want you to go, and then it will choose whatever it happens to want to do to get to that location. So the short answer is solve the two problems separately.
For one quick fix from how it sounds like, so there's a concept of respecting player intent, and if you clicked first with the mouse and then you want to click with the arrow keys, it's probably best to assume that you probably want to stop moving where the mouse first told you to. So if you have a competition, it probably is a sign that the navmesh agent is still trying to get to its destination, so probably just stop it and respect whatever latest input is.
That makes sense too. It's probably the simplest solution. Just stop the nav mesh agent the second they push the input.
Yeah.
Then you don't have to worry about all the other complicated stuff that we just blabbed about. Simplify it. I like it.
Oh, and as Jeremy points out about the nav mesh agent, it's not called every frame. So there's a case where it won't reliably be at its destination. Well, the truth is, with any kind of movement code, you're never going to have reliability for arrivals, especially with vectors which are based on floats. So I think in general, when you're trying to say, have you arrived? What you're really saying is, have you arrived close enough? And I think in general, having some check during the process of moving, of saying, am I there yet? Am I there yet? And effectively doing some kind of distance check is your best bet. And then when you're comfortable it's close enough, it's probably worth finishing. This is especially true as well because people often misuse interpolation, and they start using the like position plus equals vector 3 dot position comma target time dot delta time, and that will never arrive. If you do the vector 3 lerp with time delta time as your time parameter, it will never arrive at its destination. It will always move a bit closer, but it will literally never reach its destination. So rather than do that, have like less than a quarter unit or something, and say if within quarter unit consider I'm there. And if you pick a small enough unit, like a tenth of a unit or whatever, you can literally just snap to position, and people won't notice if it like glides across the room and then just goes, okay, right, I'm there now. That you can hide that.
One more thing about that, actually, the Unity vectors have a method called move towards, with which you can say, go to this point, this many units of movement, and if you went over, just set it to the point. And that's actually really, really convenient in case you don't want to do that approximation yourself.
And actually, there's so many Unity helper functions that I don't think people realize. Like the amount of times I see tutorials which are transformed opposition plus equals some direction multiplied by whatever. There's translate. There's literally a dot translate that way. Go there. Go in that direction. Obviously not perfect in every scenario, but if you're just trying to move a thing forward by 10 at a certain rate, you can translate forward, and it'll do it for you.
The nav mesh agent has a stopping distance too. When you brought that up, you can set it to some amount and it'll just stop when it gets that close. Doesn't have to be perfect. Otherwise, you will get that jitter because it won't actually be on the spot.
Yeah, sometimes you got to crank that up based on your nav mesh agent.
Oh, and this is a fun side note. This is one of those things I came across randomly when I was doing a client test project. So I was doing this thing where there's a bunch of cameras, and the cameras have to detect who's in frame, and then it would basically, kind of like Cinemachine, pick the best camera to see the angle of what it's looking at. And I wanted something moving to do the test with, and so I put down a big nav mesh with multiple floors and stairs and various different things. And I was like, how do I get these guys to move around the space in an interesting way? Well, what you can do is you can sample the nav mesh and like place a position on the space of the nav mesh and effectively generate points. So I just had every agent literally pick a random spot on the nav mesh and then make that their target and then do the same thing. And it leads to this really nice AI where they all just start walking around and they'll like walk around each other and do different stuff. So if you want a really quick way to test whether your space is good or whatever, and I actually think I did a video with Charles on this at one stage, literally just you can just search for it online, but you can find a quick script that will have all of your agents just randomly potter around the place, and it makes the whole space easier to test with.
And you can also use the nav mesh sampling to draw paths towards where the player target is and all that. So that's nice.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I have to hop off. I'm here at my friend's house, and I guess stop ignoring them. Sorry, I'm gonna miss the rest of the conversation.
Hey, it was good having you, Andrew. I'll see you, I guess, next week. But thanks again,
bye,
Andrew.
guys.
Have a lovely weekend.
Good luck.
Everybody go check out Andrew's channel in the link down below, Infinity PBR. And while you're at it, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and go share the stream and stuff. Oh, look at that. We just got big. Now we're big-headed. I'm gonna switch the two of you. There we go.
Big Jasons.
Looks like you're looking at each other now instead of away. All right. So there was another question that popped up here. I figured we'd just jump onto it. By the way, Salim might join in too. He sent me a message, but he hasn't replied again since. So we'll see. He's having some setup stuff, so hopefully he's set up and ready to go. Yeah, but if you haven't already shared the stream and hit like, please do. I just realized for some reason it's set to 720p, so it's like getting hit by YouTube for that because the stream quality went down. I don't know why, but yeah, sharing and liking helps a lot. So let's hit this question real quick. Do you have any recommendations for handling game state for games with many varied modes, with unique rule sets, random generation, etc., but keeping it simple and easy to use? I like the end part there.
How do you build something complicated but make it really easy?
So to start with, it's a problem of multiple problems and keeping them as small as possible, handling them separately. Because if you have different game modes, then just make a different test scenario for each game mode. If you have a problem of random generation, make a small section of your project that's just dedicated to the random generation and making sure that it works as you want it to. To keep it simple and easy to use, once you have that abstraction layer where you don't check if it's this game mode, this game mode, this game mode, and it's just this game mode runs right now and it does what it needs to do, then you can probably see the entire state working as designed. And you could look up rule engine if you have similar modes with different rules applying over time or under certain conditions.
What about saving the state? I was kind of thinking of it in that mode too, because we were talking so much about serialization, but thinking about like saving when things are randomly generated and you've got unique rule sets. Do you need to think about anything special there?
Well, it's just more data that you end up with. So if a game mode of, say, deathmatch has 30 kills, you just save the mode deathmatch, open a game, make a deathmatch instance, insert the kills, and that's that. It's no different than any other runtime entity.
What about for like the random generation? You just save off the seed, right?
You can do that if you are sure that your seed is deterministic in the process that it runs. Because if anything else uses your same random instance as you do what you need
if they're
to.
one step out, even just one little step
Yeah.
past you're screwed.
One thing about that, actually, in Terraria, we have the world generation has a hash every single step. So we do one pass on the world out of 100, and we see this is the hash now, this is the hash now, and we save that to a file every time we generate a world. And we have a project that's just dedicated to make 1,000,000 worlds, save all their hashes, and do the entire thing with the exact same seed and the exact same configurations all over again, and make sure that nothing ever goes out of line, because we had issues where the seeds were not deterministic, especially across multiple platforms. So the seed would be different than, say, Linux and Mac because of floating point differences or anything else that's not as expected because of the platform differences. The abstraction layers calling the random that's shared across many things. So separate your randoms, make sure that you save the same seeds and that no external configuration changes between using these randoms.
So I think when it comes to the problem with this question is it's not one question. It's like, how do you make complicated systems interconnect in a way that's achievable? And I think the problem that I see the most is that, and this is from personal experience, I did this for years, is you keep trying to build the God system. You're smart enough to know, okay, we can't have a God object. We need a God system, though. It knows about every conceivable piece and then makes the right decisions. And it's not until I started reading up on behavior systems, and especially looking at things like flocking behaviors and dealing with steering behaviors, you start to realize that complicated behavior comes from stacking simple behaviors. So if you want a simulation of a bunch of birds or a bunch of fish, you don't make, how do I build a complicated simulation? You make a go to place. Okay, now another rule, avoid other things. Okay, but now try to go close to things that are near you. And if you apply all three rules at once, you end up with a behavior that's follow these things, but also try to stay far away, but also kind of keep kind of close. And then you dial the numbers in. And so for an example of this, if you have a complicated system where there's multiple game modes and multiple states, I'll give you an example that I was working on for a silly test project. I had a cube, and I made a little system where it moves forward, back, left, and right. And when I tested it, I had WASD. It would jump different steps. But I didn't want it to just slide. I wanted it to animate. So I used DoTween and I made a different version where it would jump when I pressed left, right, forward, and back. That's fine. Then I made another version where I wanted a little turret that would shoot the thing. So I made a turret, and I built a thing that says shoot targets. And I made a list of targets, and it shoots the targets. Then I wanted to be able to shoot the turret manually. So I made a thing where I pressed spacebar, and the turret would shoot. And it would, if it was looking at a target, it would shoot the target. Then I thought, wouldn't it be fun to have some music associated with this? So I made some music, and I used a beat thing that would generate ticked beats. Now I just have the ticked beats, press spacebar. And so now, with just a series of stuff, I didn't plan for that initially. I ended up with a bunch of AI that would jump around on the beat of music and turrets that would shoot at them on the beat of music. And then I thought, okay, this is kind of cool, but I have to keep placing the turrets myself. So what if I generated maps for this? So I built a thing that would say, okay, when I click a spot, it will place a turret. Now I have a grid of squares, and I would put a turret down in a square. What if I made something that went through an array and then randomly decided to place down turrets? So what if I did that on the beat too? So now you've got a system which will procedurally, over time, place turrets. The turrets will, on the beat, shoot enemies. The enemies will bounce on the beat. And this is like, if you ask somebody, how do you make a beat-driven tower defense game, they might go, oh god, okay, I have to do systems and audio. I was like, no, you just build a thing that moves. Build a thing that moves when you do a thing. Build a thing that does things. Have the thing that does the thing hit the other thing, and then it happens, right? So don't try to build this ultimate Uber system. If you have random rule sets, there is like a rule which says you can only have 3 turns. Build a thing that says, can I have turn? Yes, cool. If you want a mode where it's unlimited turns, give it the unlimited turn rule, and it will now do that, but with a different rule. You don't need to solve every problem. You just need to figure out one step, make it do a thing, and then attach them together as you go.
Did anybody hear a beep?
I gotta unmute myself. I was just thinking that was good advice, but I don't know if you got anything else there on that, Yara.
No, I don't really have. Jason covered it perfectly. as always.
I do tend to go on rants with certain topics like that because if there's anything if I could say there's anything I learned as a programmer that like changed the way I work, it's really dialing back my need to know the answer. Like being able to just go with the flow and write small snippets of code is the most valuable thing I ever learned. And so whenever I get a question like, how do I build the ultimate architecture? The answer is stop trying to build the ultimate architecture. Solve the problems and just step through it slowly.
If you just build the ultimate one, then you don't have to do any more work. You're done. It's ultimate.
Yeah,
It solves all the problems and you don't have to work. You can get fired now.
Make the smallest units of work and use the composition.
So what do you guys think of this question? Should you follow trends in what's hot or keep a focus on what you want? So should you start using like all the new, I'd read this as like all the new tech, whatever new stuff comes out or whatever new game ideas come out. Like I think of it, it reminds me a lot of when I was at Sony and Minecraft came out and suddenly every MMO needed to be voxel based and support modifying the world. Like
or the current trend.
New hype, every game was going to have it, and whatever game did it the best was going to be like take over the world, you know.
or like, and it's funny how you can see phases, right? Like there was the phase where every game needs towers you can stand on and ping the world. Now we're slightly past that. They're still there, but like they're not the thing you need. Now the new thing is every game that's open world needs you to be able to climb stuff and then use some sort of floating thing. If you don't have those two things, you're not an open world game.
So in regarding if you should follow it or not, it really depends on what audience you're trying to get, because a trend only lasts a certain amount of time, and if you cannot develop what you're making in that amount of time that it's relevant, well, why are you even following that trend? Because that's all people are going to see. In regards to technology, it's really difficult to recommend using a technology that's not like entirely picked up yet, because there are going to be growing hurdles and you're going to give yourself a difficult time if you don't fully embrace it. For example, with Unity Dots right now, people were like, oh, look, this is going to be the future, the next great thing, it's amazing. And then we got a year of silence because Unity decided they're going to focus on stability instead. And there was even one version around this year where you couldn't install the latest Dots package because the package manager didn't support it. So that's that in regards to technology. You're putting yourself in a battle that you actually have to work for understanding what you're working with. If we're talking about games, look up their Steam charts or whatever other metrics you can, because you can see the how the game fares over time. Take into account the updates and likes, but you can literally see a curve of how interested people are in this particular group of games, depending on the time they released in. If you compare, say, Valheim and Fall Guys, they show vastly different curves over time, depending on the trends. And there's Among Us, and you sadly cannot see Fortnite's metrics, but you know they're there.
Well, and that's it. That's funny because I was just reading the chat there, and Jack nails it. He says, determine if the trend will last long enough to cover development time. And I think this is 100% provable. If you're a big studio and you're doing a game like Fortnite, and there's a trend of everyone's keen to Marvel stuff right now, let's dump a whole lot of Marvel-related crap into our game. Cool. If you can do that fast enough to join the hype train, that's a great idea. You will genuinely get a lot of engagement, a lot of stuff if you can license that or whatever equivalent you're doing. But also, just as was mentioned, I think it was K&D, the idea is that how many games saw the rise of battle royales and then started a 2-year journey building a battle royale game, only to be completely missing the wave because by the time they come out, somebody's already done it better than they will and has the resources to continue. So from a game development perspective, don't build something on a small chance that it stays popular. Otherwise, you're screwing yourself if it doesn't. That's too much of a gamble. But you're better off trying to build something that you think will sustain. And then mechanically, if you're talking about from code perspective, you will have to deal with anything that changes on the fly. And there's nothing worse than trying to... So it's called vendor lock-in. It's when you're using someone else's tools and it breaks, so your stuff breaks. Because you're entirely reliant on their code. And if you're using something that's still being developed, I mean, you're a developer. Imagine someone saying to you, right, I'm going to build my 10-year business on your code. Don't break anything. It's like... Of course, my code's going to change as stuff grows and whatever, and so you're asking for trouble if you do that.
In general, I will use something if it's 2 to 3 years proven. So I now believe I'm comfortable saying the Unity new input system is not the new input system anymore. It's just an input system. It's good enough. I will now use it in projects. The new UI stuff, not yet. We'll give that a bit more time to cook before I'm officially going to put that into my project. So it's a personal boundary to pick, but just don't take risks. Is basically, if you can afford to take the risk, take the risk. But that's what you're doing if you're gambling.
So one more thing about the trends is that you can look at how much risk you're taking by the amount of time it takes you to make it, but you can also like look at the complexity of how much do you actually need to do for the trend, because a lot of trends really overlap under one core feature, and you don't need all the surrounding things. So a battle royale is a very risky trend because you need to have enough players from the get-go always for the game to stay alive. Whereas a tower you can ping is literally just an asset drop in a small system and you're done, and there's no risk in that at all. So follow that if you want. There's not much of a cost incurrence.
So here, let's jump on to another question about Unreal and Unity, because this pops up a lot. This one's just about the visuals, and do I think that Unity lacks severely behind Unreal because they don't have an analog to nanite, which seems like the future of real-time rendering? And this question kind of comes up a lot about just the differences between Unreal and Unity, and whether or not I think Unreal is going to destroy Unity, or occasionally whether or not I think Unity is going to destroy Unreal. I get that one less, but it does come occasionally. And in general, my answer is pretty much always the same. That I would say that it doesn't lack severely. It definitely, let's just clarify this. It does lack a little bit, right? There's definitely some stuff that Unreal can do that Unity does not do, or does not do well or as easily, without a doubt. There's also some stuff that Unity does, I think, better than Unreal. That said, I don't think that either one of them is at the point where either one has such a big lead on any specific thing that it makes them like bigger or better, or that I would call it severely lacking. Like lacks severely. I would say that it lacks in some feature sets and excels in other feature sets, and that they're just not exactly the same. If I wanted to do something that was doing extremely beautiful real-time graphics, I would probably lean towards Unreal. Right, that's just like where I would at the very least I would heavily consider jumping to Unreal, even though I really love doing Unity dev. If I wanted super photorealistic stuff, it's certainly something I would consider, especially because the artists that I'm going to work with are going to be a lot more comfortable in there as well, and it'll just work well, right? It'll handle that, but it doesn't. That's not the majority of things. I think that a lot of the time people just see like the big flashy fancy demo thing and then forget that like that's not what 99% of devs are building. That's what like the top 1% of visually appealing games are building. And you certainly don't need to have real-time beautiful amazing rendering to have a successful game. I mean, I know Terraria is super realistic and all, but
every time I see this question, I like it less and less. I mean, I just think it's like, for example, if you go back in time, and would you say when you're talking about Xbox and PlayStation and the Nintendo Wii came out, was that severely lacking because it didn't compete either graphically or from a processing perspective to the other two consoles? You could say that, or you could look at the numbers and the fact that it outsold everything else. And I think the people who built it were pretty happy that it was cheaper to make and easier to sell and had more units. So I think it's so you can't look at things from one vector like that. Like the Nintendo Switch, is it arguably like? Are you comparing a Nintendo Switch and a PS5 or whatever? And you're like, well, clearly the PS5 on all numeric counts is a better thing, therefore it's a better thing. It's not. Like, people who want to play a Switch are a different audience with different things they want, different kinds of games, and arguably it's better if you look at it from an engagement perspective, the amount of people who will rave and be involved in that community versus the ones for the PS5. And you can't just simplify things down to, well, this doesn't have this feature, so that's not as good as it. It doesn't work like that. It's entirely down to objectives, goals, and what the feature sets are for you. And you get some things with Unity that you don't get with Unreal, and you definitely get some things with Unreal that you don't get with Unity. But I think if you're looking at stuff as raw numbers like that, you're doing yourself a disservice. Forget about all of that stuff and ask yourself, who am I and what am I making? And who are Sony and what are they making? And are their requirements the same as mine? And should I be judging the worth of the tools I use based on the fact that should I measure myself against, well, if Sony are using this with all of their money to build this game, and I'm about to make my first game, should I, like, it's a silly, it's a completely irrelevant question. That there's no reason to ever consider it from that perspective. Look at the engine, look at what you're trying to make, ask yourself if it does what you need to, ask yourself what costs or benefits or problems you'll have, and pick the right one for the right job. It's a nonsense question.
But it's a question that you get a lot, though, just because when you're starting out, like, you don't know that, right? Like, how do you know that you can really kind of do most of anything with both engines, or even some of the alternative options, right? There are other options out there that we haven't even mentioned that are just less popular.
One thing that's really standing out, as Jason said, that it depends on what you need for your project, and don't take it as at the moment when we start the project, this is all we're going to ever have. You might not want to upgrade your project, but that's bad practice because you're going to put yourself in a box where you no longer get support because your version got dropped 3 years down the line. So if you go with the times, you might get access to new packages that are in the work or anything else that you might need. And ask yourself, where is your team going to be more comfortable with working? Because that's a very big thing, that if you want a feature right now, that might work for you, but you might get that feature later down the line, because Unity didn't have HDRP or URP 4 years ago. And look at where we are now with their entire set of stack composition and all of that. And we also have dots now that you can do a bunch of instancing of runtime models. Jason, one of your friends, has this project with the bazillion drones, for example. So in real-time rendering, sure, Unity is behind right now, depending on what you want to render, because real-time isn't necessarily high def. If you want a million low poly toon shaded units, Unity might actually be able to do that for you. If it's 2D, Unity definitely can do that better for you because Unreal doesn't have a solution to counter that. So it depends on what your real-time rendering is.
Yeah, these are great points.
And engines are in development too. Like, just as you were saying, engines are in development. Like, you will get features. Like, we don't know what Unity is currently focused on now. I will admit that it's frustrating that there's more transparency with Unreal. I can actually see their Trello board for what they're currently working on, and it's a better sense of what's going on. Unity's a bit up in the air. I will admit that's a frustration that I'd wish they'd let us know what we can expect. But when someone says they don't have this feature, it's like, well, they might at some stage. And I don't think, if you need that feature for your project, you need it. Use the engine that has that feature. If you don't need it, it's not about whether it has it now. It might later. So I don't really like the idea of measuring, because there was a time when the UI stuff in Unreal was absolute garbage. Like, there was a point where you couldn't do anything, and then there's a point even before that was even better than everything else when you used a scale form. So, like, the quality of UI in Unreal has, like, ebbed and flowed, and so, like, you can't measure the worth of an engine based on, is this feature good, you know?
Yeah.
I'll read off this question for you. All right, it says, your company announced they're making a new game with Unity. What was the learning process like for you? Had you already been learning Unity before your company started using it?
So I'd like to put a small correction, and we're right now training with Unity. We're not making the new game right now. The team is acquiring new skills, and everybody is trying to do pushing their limits on what they know and how can they make new stuff. Regarding my own learning process, I started using Unity in personal capacity about 2015, and I've basically been investing some hours of every day just trying to make new and fun stuff for myself and getting along with Unity's system, UI, etc. from the start. I did use some YouTube channels when I started, and the official documentation helped a lot. Unity's documentation is like the best out of the various engines I've tried. XNA is basically non-existent at this point.
Only the recent stuff, though. I find it, until they added Unity Learn, before that, it was one of the worst. And again, it comes back to the question that things change. Like, I think Unity Learn has really done a good job because it's visual. The older documentation used to be, oh, here's some docs. Here's a written description of every method call and what it does. And good luck. Now it's like, here's a problem, here's a solution, here's a video series, here's we step through it, here's screenshots as we go. So credit where it's due. The whole Unity Learn stuff has really improved the learning process for Unity.
Yeah, the Unity Learn and Mix and Jam and being brought into the official Unity team to do the tutorials on the official channel was great. Breckies and Blackphone Prod for the more visual things. You can learn a lot from those channels, not because they make necessarily the most high-end systems, but because they show you that even with a little work, you get 80% of the results already, which is fantastic for prototyping. I also use the Game Developer Convention Vault, which is the GTC Vault, which lets you see all the presentations they do yearly about advanced games and how they build their systems. For example, Spider-Man's webs and how they swing. You can learn a lot of information if you listen through it. One thing that I did additionally is I play at increased speed to spend less time, because people talk and people breathe, and that's a big spending of time that you don't necessarily gain value from. So I try to reduce on non-valuable time with that.
I do that too. Jason's the only one that talks so fast that I have to slow it back down. Every now and then, like we're on a live stream, I'm like, do I need to slow this down? Like, oh wait, this is live. He just actually talks that fast. But yeah,
I'll be
people
honest.
I gotta like double the speed when they're talking, and I'm like, oh, okay.
When I'm doing video editing, I can't watch my own stuff too fast either. It's the same thing. I can't even hear my own voice at like, normally I watch stuff when I'm skimming through the editing, but I'll admit I speak too fast for myself.
Yeah, sometimes I gotta force myself to slow down even, just to make the video longer. All right.
Beyond what I mentioned, trying to check other games codes. There are some public ones, for example, Celeste's Player and other things. Public projects, they help a lot with seeing how people tackle problems that you haven't before, or their advanced solution. There are more than 100 character controllers out there for your specific problem. I can guarantee that, no matter what it is. So looking at those and then proving that you can make your own things with those solutions is fantastic for the learning experience. And you can also bring it back to Terraria, by the way. A lot of things that I learned that I didn't know, I learned with Unity, and then I just brought the information back to Terraria. My biggest learning curve was shaders, and I actually used Shader Forge for that for a limited time. So visual scripting saved the day there. Yeah,
Have you found anything really difficult to do in Unity?
What? Jason?
Sorry, we're talking at the same time.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
Jason.
I was just gonna ask if there was anything you found difficult, like going into Unity, like that was just strange or weird, making that transition when you first started out.
The biggest thing I struggled with was nested prefabs and them not existing at the time.
Oh, that was such a game. I can't believe there was a time that didn't have the most obvious Unity feature.
So the concept of prefabrication was entirely alien to me when I started with Unity. In Terraria, we just have a class. This is an NPC. It has all the data all the NPCs will ever have, and this is all I need to deal with. And all I do is just set some values, and I'm done. With Unity, the composition of components was a big thing for me to get used to, but that was relatively quick. The more difficult part was, okay, I have this set of components and I have this game object, and now I need another game object. What do I do? Because the bindings, the dependencies, and the lack of nested prefabs meant, well, I have to do this at runtime, and I have to find all the bindings and hook them up. And that's way more steps than you'd like to have for something that might change a lot through development. Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that, like, I know it sounds silly, but I always take it for granted until I stop and realize how nice it is. When you have an object in the scene in Unity and it's got a bunch of other references that it's using, especially like its own children, and you copy and paste it, the copied version doesn't reference the old stuff. It references the instance new ones and auto replaces all of the references. It's like, thank you. Otherwise, because think about it, what's the intuitive thing that would happen there? If I copy this and paste it, all references should point to the old stuff, right? It should, like, that's conceptually what should happen. But it's actively, it understands by duplicating it, you also want to replace every hypothetical reference, you know?
Yeah, the concept of shallow cloning not happening is fantastic. I actually struggled with this a lot when I had a singleton in one of my projects, and it was like, well, I duplicated something and I changed all the references, and something broke. Because I didn't see that they're both referencing one certain thing that I didn't have a duplicate of because it wasn't on the object.
That's why you don't use singletons like that. That's a life lesson that we all learn at some stage. Singleton, that's why they're bad. They're not bad, but that's why they can be bad.
Yeah, they're bad because the perception is that they're difficult to manage.
So, are either of you guys taking part in the game jam next week? This question popped up.
I myself am not, because I didn't even realize there's one coming soon. I might consider it.
Yeah, I wanted to do one this weekend. There's a Backtrace game jam that I was really hoping to do, but like I said, with the baby and stuff, it's been a little too busy. Didn't really become an option. So maybe next week, there's a small chance that I'll jump in on it. I'd really like to get in and do a game jam sometime soon. I just got to find the time. I'm like a mile behind on emails and everything else. As I was supposed to meet with Jason on Wednesday, last Wednesday.
Oh yeah. Hey, yeah. I was busy too. I forgot. So that shows. That shows
behind on everything. Yeah, it's So yeah, I don't know, but I might check that out and actually try to do it if I can get in on it. If other people do and you make something and submit it, that'd be cool. I'd love to check it out too. Maybe do some code reviews on some of those things.
I'm at least 3 weeks away from having enough free time to consider questions like that. I'm currently working on a project which it's taking a bit of time, so unfortunately not.
Somebody was asking if anybody would have insight on getting a publisher's attention, working on a demo for a game and wanting to try to get funding through something like the Epic Mega Grant. I don't have a lot of insight on getting.
I'll be honest. I know this. It's not a particularly satisfying answer to give you, but if you're making a game with an intent to sell it and you think you're going to get a year or two's worth of income out of it, investment in that is not that big of a deal. So here's the bullet biting answer for you. Buy either David Whaley or Thomas Brush's course. Both of them cover in pretty good detail the publisher side of things. If that's a direction you want to go, spend $300-$500 or whatever it is they're charging to get access to that information. It may seem like you may not want to spend that much for it, but if your goal is to sell something and make a lot of money out of it, that investment could be the difference of knowing how to do it correctly and how not to. So I would say do your homework and find a course and learn to do it from people who've done it before.
So one thing I wanted to say about this is that there's already a great resource about how to get a publisher's attention, and it's on the GDC channel on YouTube, and it's called 30 Things I Hate About Your Game Pitch, which is a fantastic talk about everything you're about to do wrong and you should avoid doing. And if you follow these, you're very likely to at least get more eyes on the project. And I don't have a lot of experience with this myself, but you do want to find a publisher that already deals with something similar to what you have, because the truth is, if you have a publisher, what they're doing is generating eyes for your project to be seen by. And if you are going with a publisher that never had a project like yours, it means they probably never had an audience that seeks your things. So you want a publisher that has the stuff that your project matches with. So that
there's a reason why every game that Devolver Digital puts out may not be the same game, but they all feel like they live in a shared universe, right? There's a certain level of a style and aesthetic and humor and attitude that Devolver Digital games have, and if your game is like that, you want to pick the right publisher to match your content.
Yeah.
See if I can get that video playing in a little window. Okay. Yeah, that's a great video, though. I've watched that a couple of times in the past and shared it quite a few times. I always forget about it, though. It's got lots of good advice, and it's a guy who's heard insane amounts of pitches. I can only imagine what that's got to be like. That would seem like a very stressful job for me, like listening to people try to sell their dream and then having to shut them down because you've already heard it a million times and it's no good or it's just not ready.
And the other thing too is a lot of people have ideas that are good, but the pitches are just woeful. People don't know how to pitch stuff. Like pitching is a skill. You could literally pitch a cure for cancer and get it wrong to the point that no one would be interested, right? Like you have to. It's amazing how it's very easy to ruin a sales pitch for something, and so learn how to do it correctly. And one of the main things is to simply avoid stuff that they don't care about. Step one, find out who you're pitching to and find out what they care about and pitch the right things. And the biggest mistake I see from people pitching anything is they go off in a huge, big, memorized tangent of what they find interesting. And the biggest example of this, if anybody ever pitches anything and they start with a 10-minute description of the lore and the characters and the universe and all of the different planets, and then there's the races and the wars and there's the history, and oh, this is cool. It's like, why do I care about the universe of your game, but I don't even know what your game is yet? So don't start your pitch. Your lore is something that should be delivered piecemeal over the course of the story of the game. If you want to give a summary, fine. But the worst pitches, the ones that will never succeed, are when people step up and go, "I have all of these great ideas for this universe." Okay, what have you made? Oh, nothing. I just like ideas. It's cool. Like, what do I do with that? That's not a pitch. That's a dream. So distill it down to what practically matters, and then the lore is stuff that it's something that people who are already invested care about. But you have to get the investment before you can start doing the lore stuff.
And there's also the concept of you have to make sure that when you're talking to a person and you're making your pitch, you actually go for the things that interest the person. And you can train with that. You can present your game to 1 million people, but as long as they're not the person you're pitching to for a gain, then go ahead and make the mistakes, learn from them, and then don't repeat them. Because if you're going to say something wrong and you see the person getting bored, notice that, take note of it, don't repeat that again with the next person, see if that's any better. And when you get to your pitch with the person that's actually important, make sure to see what catches their eye, their attention, their interest, and go with that, because in the end, the person has to be interested enough to say, I am going to risk my income, my money, and my time, and I'm going to invest in this particular person and their project and their dream. And you're going to have to ask people to shatter your dreams for you. Don't come with an ego and say, you are not allowed to complain as I explain my 10 minutes of lore. You're going to say, hey, I'm going to explain 10 minutes of lore to you. Tell me when you get bored or you have any problem, or if anything is wrong, please do say so, because ego isn't going to help you sell.
Yeah, and the other thing too people don't realize is you're going to be asked tough questions. One of the scariest parts of pitching is you know all of the answers to the questions you care about. But midway through your pitch, someone's going to say, okay, what's your team size? What's their experience? How many years have they worked on this? How do you deliver this system? How long will it take you to do this? How much money will it cost you to hire? Do you need to buy external assets? Do you have a 3D modeler in mind? You'll be like, I don't know yet. And it's like, well, if you haven't thought about this stuff and you're like stuttering confused there, it's like, well, that's their money and they want to know how you'll use it. So if you want a great example of this, just watch the show Dragon's Den or Shark Tank or one of those, and you watch people who walk in super confident, and the minute they're asked, how much money? What's the deadlines? How much are you making? How much stock do you have? You're like, I don't know how much stock I have. Yeah, it's like, well then, what are you doing? Like, why are you here? If you don't know the basics of your own business, why are you even here? So you have to be brutal and ask yourself, if someone walked up to you and said, can I have your money? I'm doing an X. What questions do you have for that person? And make sure you have the answers to those questions when they're asked of you.
Yeah, you got to convince them that you're going to make back their money and a lot more to make it worth their time, right? So, and I think a lot of people just kind of skip out on that part and don't even know the size of the market, don't know how many people play whatever their competition is or what the competition is, or don't know that the game that they want to make already exists. And there are like 10 copies of it that nobody else was interested in. And the best for me is like the people who want to make a game, they'll describe a game and then you tell them that game exists, but they don't actually want to play that game. Right?
Yeah, or the other one is when someone asks you very plainly, what is the size of your audience? They're like, I don't know. Have you looked at other games in the industry? No, not really. List the top 3 games like your one. I don't really know what is. Okay, so you don't know what games are out there like yours, who plays them, how many of them there are, whether it's going to make any money. What are you doing? Like, how do we continue from here?
It's a hard pitch.
Yeah.
Cool. So anybody have any other questions? I guess if you do, just drop them in chat and we'll take them. And hit the thumbs up button and go share the stream real quick too. We have less likes than concurrent viewers, which seems like a problem. So got to hit the button and pump it up. I think the problem is that my little thumb thing is like off screen. You can't see it anymore. So oh yeah, it's way over there. So I gotta like change view. So nobody's remembering to hit the button. I gotta move it right where the dinosaur head is.
As a small side note, while we're talking, here's something cool I thought people might get a kick out of. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see if I can get it to register.
Oh, it's a tiny Game
Oh,
Boy.
okay, yeah. When you tilt it, we can see it. That angle,
yeah.
I can see the screen.
There we go. We can kind of see the screen.
Yeah.
Is that a
This
little
is the-
Game Boy?
It is. It's a fully functional Game Boy that can play like PS1 games. It's crazy. So this thing,
PS1.
yeah, you can play PS1, N64, the whole lot. This is called the Fun Key, and it's it's tiny. It's great. It's one of these little things I got recently. It's great fun. I've been playing some Game Boy games on it in particular. I actually have like a full size Game Boy and other stuff over there. It's kind of ridiculous playing on a 2-inch size screen, but it is kind of amazing that I can literally play like Mario Kart and Crash Bandicoot on like this. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, that is really cool. Just assume it just attaches to your keychain then.
Yep. And as for the color, as Paul points out, this was the color of the original Game Boy I had. I had a Game Boy Color that I got for Christmas as a kid, and it was this the clear purple one. And I actually have that Game Boy, both the original one I used to have and a refurbished one of the exact same model somewhere behind me as well.
Nice. I've lost all my old stuff. It's sad. I think I might still have my old HD DVD player, but that's about it. The most useless one of all. So, somebody asked if we have any experience outsourcing PR, social media, marketing, and stuff using services like Fiverr. I haven't done that with Fiverr, but I've done it a couple of times, and I've known a few people who've done it outside of Fiverr, like through other agencies or finding agencies or through referrals. And in general, I haven't seen a whole lot of payoff from it. Like I haven't seen a lot of ROI. It's relatively pricey. The people working on it aren't really involved with your project and are working on multiple projects, and they're often like trying to find more projects. They're looking for more contracts and other opportunities. So I would say you're probably better off having a full-time person or just a person on contract that's only working on it, not a separate agency. But I mean, I don't have a whole ton of experience with it either. There may be some agencies and marketing people that are just amazing at it and good at it. So yeah, I don't have a lot of thoughts on that though. I don't know if you've done much of that at all, Yori, or
So I basically don't go out and ask a lot of people to create stuff for me because the asset store suffices. But I do have a rather large email folder where I ask the people who make assets to make more assets because I saw what they make. I like their standards. Can they make stuff for me? So that's not Fiverr, but it is a source you can go to. I didn't deal with any outsourcing PR because the product I work on is not managed by me.
That said, Fiverr is pretty good for finding art assets too. If you want to just find random things for relatively cheap, or if you want to find, there's some really like good artists on there too that are just not nearly as cheap. But if you want to find some cheap stuff, there are definitely some options on there. It's going to be kind of hit or miss as you go along. There was a question from Andy. Since Terraria was made with the XNA framework, what opinions do you have on using XNA versus Unity? Besides the fact that XNA is deprecated, any pros or cons that come to mind?
Yeah, so XNA is a framework and not a game engine, and those are vastly different tasks that they fulfill for you. Because a game engine, when it comes down to it, it's a package of code that handles tasks that you don't want to care about when you work on the things. You come to make a cool game. You don't come to get the input, render things, run on Sony, run on Xbox, run on PC, doesn't matter. The point is you want to work on the game content. And when you get a framework, you don't get these systems. You don't get physics that just play. You get asset loading. You get methods that can call drawing a rectangle with a texture, but you don't get shaders. You don't get physically based information. You get nothing. And that can be a good thing because here's one of the biggest gripes I have with both the big game engines right now, with Unity and Unreal, is that you have a transform component. The game engines decide it's useful to have a transform component that has free access for the X, Y, and Z, which are the positions in space, but not what scene they're in. And that's a very big thing, because if you need the scenes to start, say, coexisting in the same space, spatially, in a game like, say, an MMO where you have instance dungeons, where do the instances go? If you want a single game instance to manage all of this, you suddenly are out of luck, because if the dungeon is made to be in positions 0, 0, 0, where's the second dungeon going? And that's a lot of extra work that you have to deal with, because you picked a game engine that wasn't made for this purpose. Whereas if you have a game and a framework, you can just say, well, my position has X, Y, and Z, and scene index if I need it, or any other thing like that. Or you can say, well, instead of managing the scenes at runtime and they all touch each other, my scenes are actually in isolation, which is something like, say, Stardew Valley does. And you can see a lot of these small problems cropping up as you make your things. For example, in Terraria, I can say, load all the textures for the game from our folder of content. And then if I have a texture pack, load it from that folder instead. And if I have a zip file, load it from that folder. Unity doesn't have that for you. It decided how it made its things, and you decided, I don't care about it. Unity, give me your stuff. But if you suddenly care, then you lose the entire benefit of using Unity for that specific purpose. So which systems are you okay with using someone else's code? Is basically what it comes down to.
So in general, what would you recommend? I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, about using frameworks versus engines. I mean, you're already kind of looking at Unity, but what would you recommend for people building their own game? Or when would you recommend that they go with a framework instead of using one of the engines, I guess?
The point comes where you see something that the engine does that you know you're not going to be able to use, and you know it's going to be a pain to replace. And that's something that you're going to have to get some experience or do a lot of research to understand which systems can be swapped out without a lot of overhead cost of development. Because once you start saying, I can't use this, I have to write my own thing, you're already going to pay the cost of writing your own thing. Now the question is, since I'm using the game engine, how do I make the thing I wrote work with the game engine? Which might be a very big struggle, depending on the feature and the engine, compared to the framework where you know it's just your code. And you pay the cost for making it. Now you don't need to pay any cost for making it work with something else.
Yeah. For me, it comes down to, I guess, weighing that cost and then the cost of all the other things too. So if it's going to take me a little bit of extra time to make it work in the engine, or it's going to take me some extra time, but the amount of time is going to still be dramatically less than all the recreation of other stuff that I have to do, then I still generally stick with an engine. And to be real, it's been quite a while. I think XNA is the last time that I actually really dove in using a framework building a game. And that was before it was deprecated quite a while ago. So,
and on that note too, like, I've seen examples of this where, again, because I do corporate work, is I've seen companies who, again, under NDA you can't really talk about, who will go to somebody like me or a small company, and they will say, make us a prototype of this game idea, and we'll do it in Unity. The engine doesn't matter. It's just a quick, like, grab some assets, do something quickly. They're going to try to make a game in Unreal. They're not actually going to use Unity, but they're not asking for my code. They're asking to see if the concept works. Is it fun? And so hiring out a small team and giving them 10 or 20,000 and saying, just make a thing, see if it's good. Is it something that we want to invest the next 3 years in X million making or whatever? And so they'll actually hire small studios to just put together quick demos for them. They don't really talk about that, and you're never going to get your name on those games, but it does happen sometimes, right? And so if in that case, the features you need are the features that get you a demo quickly. And so when assessing, I could have used Unreal because it would look closer to what the client is going to end up using, but they don't actually care about that. They're going to have artists and dedicated people. What they care about is, as cheaply as possible, getting a gameplay loop that they can test and see if it's worth investing the time for.
So a question popped up, I think related to you talking about looking at market share, asking how do you research the market share? They thought the Steam API was closed. And I'll just pop up the link that you just dropped in, which is steamcharts.com. So you just look right on here. You want to just explain what it is to everybody?
So Steam does actually publicly have metrics for all the amounts of players that are playing by the hour for every single game and executable application, essentially, on the store right now that can freely look at. And you can actually see the metrics going as far years back because this site pulls it. So if you say go down, you can actually see Terraria is in the top records for the 6th one and how many players it had at its peak, what was the date, the graph over time since its birth, and if you click the game, you can actually see month by month what was our peak players, etc., etc. And you can say, well, I know the data for one game, now what's the data for another game? You can compare, you can see the popular hours, which means this game might actually be worth investing for localization in this specific country because when it's this country's peak time, a lot of players play. You can make the correlation. It's probably players of this country playing with this language, and you can benefit from that. So that's, for example, how you can see by country where you'll be more popular, probably. Others are, well, which games are popular, so what features should you watch out for when you're making your stuff, because if this one is less popular, the other one does things better, what's the difference? Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, without a doubt. I'm just looking at this, just intrigued, looking at these numbers. They're really impressive. I was curious, too. Is it May 2020? Was that an update or something?
Yeah, that was the 9th anniversary of the game, and we released the biggest 1.4 update for the game that time. It competes with 1.3 on being impressive, but it was essentially a 3.5 years worth of an update, I think. Just released at once. Busy time.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a huge jump. I mean, yeah, I mean the numbers in general for the game are great. The fact that it shows up on the front of the Steam charts, just that alone, at the top. Yeah. So yeah, this is where you go. Just go to steamcharts.com and look at that competition. And then
and just on that note too, is when you're talking about because you briefly mentioned tweaking your game and sort of figuring out what you should spend your time on. Something that a lot of people don't realize is analytics is something you can kind of get relatively easily for free with Unity as well. There's other platforms you can pay for services, but there's literally under the services checkbox in Unity, there's something called analytics. You turn it on, and all of a sudden you can see a dashboard with where players come from, what country they're in, when they're started up, how many unique instance players you have. You haven't done anything. That's just one button in the services menu. Now, if you want more data, you can pull in their analytics service, and you can start doing stuff like firing custom events, tracking level progression, how far along certain quests players actually get, how upgrade trees work for which trees they're choosing for their characters. You can learn all of this stuff. You can even do A/B testing. There's an inbuilt thing in the Unity Analytics where you could say number of enemies per spawn wave or health the main boss has. And you could literally have an A/B tested change the number on a web page, and different players will get two different sets of that. And you can start to see how the analytics change by tweaking those kinds of values and try to balance your game that way. So if you're trying to tweak this stuff, look at what tools are available for you. You'd be surprised how much of this stuff is there if you could just use the features available.
Yeah, the stores particularly will usually be happy providing you information because if you want to get on the store, they want to help you succeed. They have the incentive because they'll get money out of your success. So you can ask. That's a big thing that you should also learn to do.
You ever put a game up with A/B testing of the gameplay so that it shows the analytics and then writes out gives you data on how long people are playing in one version versus the other?
No, myself, I only worked on Terraria in professional capacity, so sadly not. Jason, did you?
No, most of the stuff I do is short-lived, unfortunately. I know these things exist because I know people who do make games, and I'll put it this way. I have friends who are not strong programmers, but who have full games for sale on Steam who want to add new features, but then hire contract devs to do the extra kind of bits they can't do or they're not familiar with. And so I've had to integrate features into other people's games, but then I leave and they go to configure it and test. And so I never actually see the outcomes of a lot of that stuff. So I've seen how it works, but I've not really had the luxury of doing the A/B testing or seeing where that stuff goes.
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, it's hard. The hardest part is figuring out what the right questions are to ask and to test. You know, and actually finding things to test that are valuable and getting real data back. But there was a question about what you find, how you feel about LinkedIn Learning for finding positions in the gaming industry and VR industry. In my experience, LinkedIn is relatively good for finding just programming jobs in general. There seem to be a lot of technical managers really like to use LinkedIn. And it's also the case in the game industry. I've seen the managers and producers in there are the same kind of people that are managers and producers at managers at other companies that like to use tools like LinkedIn, and they're on there all the time. So I think that it's probably a really good option. I think you've used it quite a bit, haven't you, Jason?
A bit.
A little bit. I've got a couple friends who use it quite a bit for VR stuff specifically. So I couldn't remember if you were in that group.
The problem is oftentimes when I'm in a team project, there's lots of like areas that people focus on, and I would say probably not as there's usually somebody else more so than me that would handle that.
Myself, I'm in the same position as Jason here. Sorry, I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, I think in general it's a good option. I mean, LinkedIn in general is not a bad place to find jobs. Posting stuff there, talking to people there, I've seen it be pretty successful.
I will say
always
though,
look people up on there. Whenever we're hiring somebody, I'll look them up there. It's something I'd check out. I don't keep my LinkedIn profile updated though. I have no idea what
it's If anything, I find my problem is that. So, I don't really do a lot of the hiring stuff myself. I tend to be part of the interview teams and things like that. And I've done work where I've helped vet a CV that's been brought to me and stuff. But for context, I got my very first programming job through LinkedIn. Like literally, my very first programming job was through LinkedIn. I will say though that it's great for starting out because it's kind of like, to me, it's like a pit with just a gaggle of recruiters, and they're just like, help, I need people, and you can just like, if you're looking for a job, somebody somewhere will like, you can throw yourself into the pit and find yourself a job. When you're in the industry long enough that you're doing whatever you're doing for the last 8-10 years, it starts to have a different effect. It starts to feel like zombies banging on your door going, work, we have work available. It's like, okay, can I have any information about it? No. We don't know what we're talking about. Some company just told us they need people. It's like, and so you end up getting these spam emails because people will read your resume and then just start sending you crap. So in my case, I lose interest in it as time goes by. Although I did say before, one little life pro tip. Sometimes companies will auto-generate these responses. They will literally do a scan, find anybody with the word React. God help me, so many React. I don't even do React, but I get React requests every bloody week. They'll pick a word and they'll skim that you did one time this one technology, and they'll send you a bunch of stuff. If you want to check whether you're getting earnest requests for you or just bulk emails, do something to your name label in LinkedIn such that it will indicate if someone has scraped the name. In my case, I have a little diamond icon. And if I ever get an email or a private message or anything from somebody and they've used an emoji diamond as part of hello, diamond, Jason, it's like, you did not write that out. You did not go and find the diamond as part of my name when referencing me in the URL. That's some bot. And so I just ignore those. So that's just a quick, if you want to have a better chance of detecting the spam messages.
Yeah, it's a good tip. I get a lot of those spam ones too. So there was a question about code reviews. What the percent chance of a code review episode next week was. I'm going to say probably about 50. It just really depends on how busy the weekend's up and how much you can get caught up with stuff. So it's probably about 50-50. And then there was a question about the learning phase of Unity for Yari. That was kind of interesting. So since Relogic's in the learning phase with Unity, what does that look like on a day-to-day basis? Is it making prototypes and showing them off, or just learning from tutorials? And I guess it also, like, are you guys doing this at work? Are you doing that, or is it more of just like on the side at home?
So we do we work we learn on work time, and what we do is different people have different levels of understanding of Unity. So we make sure that everyone gets personal matching of what they need to do. We also had to work with like version control because in Terraria only the programmers had access to the Git of the project, and now we wanted everyone to be on board on the Unity project because you also art in Unity because it's the game engine and it's responsible for that, and we don't want to deal with it. And the artist gets the instant feedback of how to use the engine to see the work in progress. So if there's any problems with the sprite, they can fix them before we have to see them, which is a big deal in terms of team efficiency. There's actually a great talk about that in GDC that I should probably link later. But right now, what we're doing is we invest sometimes in having whoever knows most tell the others, hey, study this topic. Here are some resources about it. Here are some lessons that I'm going to explain personally for you. And then here's a project that I want you to do to show that you understand what I'm talking about and how you use it with the other things. Then we had a game jam project that lasted a certain amount of time, more than 3 weeks of work, where we said, this is our goal. We're going to try and make something that feels good for that category. I sadly can't talk about the details because non-disclosure agreements, but beyond that, it's basically, let's make something that proves a principle that we want to see, a prototype, and see if everybody managed to work on it properly. When we're done, we do a postmortem, and instead of just blaming people, as mentioned in the previous episode, what we're doing is we're addressing where were problematic fields, how we can do better, and we're trying to compare if we didn't allocate enough time, or we didn't allocate enough people, or if people lacked a certain knowledge that they needed, and if they had the chance to learn it properly as they worked. Because there's this thing where you're saying, we have 3 weeks on this project, and I need this thing working right now, and I'm going to do the fast solution that isn't very good, but that I found on the internet, but I didn't actually understand what I'm doing. And we don't want that. We want the team to acquire skills, so invest the time after that. And it's basically
I find
that. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say I find when I first started doing this stuff, it's very hard to tell what it's like, what like minute to minute is like for people learning new stuff like this, especially in a company. If you want to see it happen, it's a little bit more sort of cinematic for TV. But if you look at the Amnesia Fortnights, which are basically what's the name of that studio again? The one who did completely blanking now. The Psychonauts. What's the name of that studio? I can't believe I'm blanking. This is infuriating me. I know it's Tim Schafer. I even know his name. I just don't remember the name of the studio. Double Fine.
Double Fine. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. Oh, drives me insane. I hate when that happens. You just get this blank in your head. Double Fine do this thing called Amnesia Fortnight. And what it basically means is it's an internal game jam where they have their actual developers ranging of different skills and different levels and different skill sets and whatever. And they basically make games. They split up, they do pitches, and they go through the whole cycle. So everything we've talked about, from pitching to working with a team to building a project, you get to see it all. And you get to see people who have never pitched before try to do pitches. They may have worked in a games industry, in a games company for 5 years, but they've never had to pitch their own idea. And so you get to see people of different skills and different abilities and different comfort levels of doing this go through the process. And then if their pitch gets succeeded or chosen, they have to make it. So now you've got people who have to manage a team, and they've never managed a team before. And so I think it's a very humbling and interesting experience to watch people put themselves out there learning this stuff for the first time. And people think that, once you're in a games company, that's it, you've won, you've got the right. It's like there's still entire skill sets you don't have just because you're there. And like you'll still be lost, and you'll still be learning stuff, and you'll still be confused. And I've never seen a better real example of what it actually feels like to work with people and learn things than going through those. And they've been doing these in 2017. Like there is hours and hours of content of watching different teams of people struggle to make a game in a short period of time. And you get to see what problems come up, where people get deadlines wrong, what they misunderstand, people who are more art driven trying to do more programming stuff, people who are more programming trying to find time. And then in the later one, they have to deal with co-location for certain people. It's like, it's so honestly practically literally what happens, to the point that I find if any of this stuff interests you, you'll get a really good example of what this looks like.
I guess we'll jump on to, and actually there was a statement here I wanted to quickly address because it kind of rung to me, and it said I did support in QA years ago, and I still get job offers in LinkedIn for those positions despite being a software engineer for years. It reminded me because I get these all the time too. Like my first dev job was QA, and I get constant emails and LinkedIn messages about doing QA test plans and all kinds of stuff, all these new testing positions that are open. I'd say that's probably like half the stuff I get. Another half is JavaScript stuff that I'm totally unqualified for. I very rarely get anything that is actually like a matching fit from a recruiter. Oh, occasionally I get some firmware jobs. Like, hey, do you want to write firmware for an airplane or something? Like, nope, haven't written firmware since college either.
Yeah, I the same thing. That's the thing about React. That's what drives me insane. I haven't done React in probably like 7 or 8 years, and because it's the most popular web platform for a lot of companies, that's where most of my job offers are. It's like, have you not noticed the last X number of years have all been other things, and that's the one that you want to? Yeah, it very clearly shows that they're not reading it; they're just skimming for the keyword.
Yeah, no, it's automated. You got to mass automate that to get any hits. I'm sure they're just tools that they're using to just spam it to everybody. Somebody said they had a game they were working on for 2 years, don't have a degree, worried about potential job opportunities. They'll turn them down. Any advice? Start looking at those job opportunities now. I mean, if you're already working on a game and you're looking for a job in the future, just start looking now. Like, start showing them what you're doing, what you're working on, and don't wait until you're done. I mean, assuming you want to work on it. And you definitely don't necessarily need a degree to get a job. Having a game built is more valuable, I think, than having most degrees. Well, depending on the game that you built, that is. If you built a game and it's good and you can show it off, that's better than having a degree most of the time.
Oh, and actually, this is on the side note of looking for jobs and building your resume and all of that. There's a really great bit of advice my friend Nick told me, which it seems obvious in retrospect, but it's a pretty good one to keep in mind. If you advertise yourself as being able to do a certain job, you'll get more of that job. If you don't actually want to do that job, even if you can, don't advertise it. That was the problem that I made the mistake of. When you're building your resume, you're like, oh, I previously worked as an X, and then I did Y, and then I did Z, and then did some web stuff, and then did some database stuff. And it's like, but God, I hope I don't get a job for database stuff. It's like, well, why are you putting that as a thing, as a feature on your resume? If it comes up during the interview process for a different job that you can also do it if pushed, great. But if you don't want a job doing that thing, then don't advertise that as your primary feature. So just keep in mind, your resume is like, these are the things I will do for a living, and make sure that you're tailoring yourself to the jobs you actually want to have.
And focus it onto the position that you're applying for. Like, one of the easiest, simplest tricks you can do is just reorder the shit on your resume so that it's in order of what that job cares about. If that job is a online game company and they care about online stuff, then put the networking things that you know at the top, and then the things related below that. If it's an Unreal job, move Unreal to the top. If it's a Unity job, move Unity to the top. Put the things that they care about on the top. So, because when they look at a resume, they're looking to see, do they know the things that I care about? They're not looking. They don't want to look through the whole list of stuff. So if you put the stuff they care about at the top, it's going to help. Because people associate the stuff with like at the top as the most important or most valuable or the primary thing that you're good at, and you want to make it, whether or not that's the case, that's just the way that they're going to read it. So you want to make sure that the things they care about are right up there in the order that makes the most sense.
So the thing you're describing is actually called anchoring, which is you see the first thing the person does is what they are. And if the first thing they do is QA, you'll want them for QA. And even if the next 10 items on the list are programming. So you want people to be anchored exactly for the best thing that you think they want for that. Another thing I wanted to say is you're likely to succeed if you try, which to succeed, you actually need to try. So don't fear sending resumes. Your potential failures are all isolated. No one is going to say, oh, this process was so bad, I'm going to tell the entire industry to never hire you. That's not going to happen. If you fail, just go to another person and another person. You'll learn how to do it better, do it right, and it's better to start now than in 5 years when you actually need it.
Without a doubt. I think that's the main way that people fail at most things in life, is just giving up and not trying. People get afraid of failure or afraid of success and just don't actually try, and they delay, make excuses, wait, wait until they meet some requirement or get something or get some specific skill or finish some specific little project, then it'll be enough. But then there's just another one that gets added on. You just got to go like, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to try now, and if I don't get it now, I'll try again tomorrow, and if I don't get it then, I'll keep trying until you get into the position or the thing that it is that you're trying to do. Number one advice: don't give up. Just keep trying and keep pushing.
And if you want an example of that, a lot of people seem to think that they like the way I program. Well, here's the thing: when I left college, I applied for a job at Microsoft, and I not only did I not get it, I bombed that interview like nobody's business. It was the worst interview ever. Yeah, so we've had the conversation before. Yeah,
at Microsoft.
So, yeah, and I took a bus home, and I genuinely reconsidered my life choices. Am I a programmer? And I actually genuinely was looking at changing careers at that point. So just it happens to everybody.
Yeah, when I did, I was like, man, I really suck at this. I was like, I thought I was a lot better than I am. I was like, I gotta either learn more or apply somewhere else. And I learned a little bit more and applied somewhere else and got a job at Intel instead. But it took a little while. And I mean, I was like, after that Microsoft one, I was like, oh, wow, this is way harder than I thought. Like, I don't know nearly as much as I thought I knew when I went into this interview. It's like, oh, okay, like, you guys, yeah. But it was their interviews were also, it was like the peak of the Microsoft weird interview time, where it was there were technical questions and C# questions that I obviously completely bombed and failed, but those weird questions kill me. I hate those weird riddle questions. They just drive me completely insane.
In my case, like I remember too, like it's funny coming out the other end of that and now being like, this is like 10 years later. I'll be honest, I did hate that interview, and I do think now I would never conduct an interview that way. It was like a game show. They had a bunch of us there, and they had someone watching over us, and they would send us into different rooms. It was a whole stupid thing, but the point still stands. It was crazy time.
Yeah, so just try, get out there, keep trying, and don't give up. And when you fail, like, just take what you can, learn from it, and then try again. It's one of the reasons I recommend when people want to get a job too. Like, go on a lot of interviews and start with the jobs that you care the least about, right? Like the positions that you're the least excited about. Apply for the ones that you're most excited about and you really, really care about last. So that way, at least if you have a couple experiences where you're stumbling and bombing and trying to figure out how to interview and how to talk to people again, you can do that on the less stressful ones. And I mean, I've found this situation where if I apply for a job and like by the time I get to the interview, or even by the time I accept the interview, I realize like a 90% chance I don't actually want this job. Like, I'm pretty sure I don't want to work on this project, or I don't like the location, or the pay is not good, or whatever. But I'll go check it out just in case. Maybe it's good. And at very least, I'll get some good interview experience kind of practicing it, right? I mean, if I know 100% I'm not going to take it, I won't waste their time. But if there's a small chance that I'm going to take it or be interested, then I'll go in and then just go through the process and find it's super relaxing. If you don't care about getting the job, if you're like, no,
yeah, you interview so much better.
Like, it'd be cool if they offered it, but there's no, the stress disappears and you can get into the flow really good. And then it helps for the next one where you care a lot more. And yeah, it's always been helpful. Whenever I want to look for something new, I start applying for a lot of things and just go interview at a couple places, check them out, see what it's like, and get used to it before I go to the ones that I'm really, really the most interested in.
And a tip on being interviewed. So this is as somebody who does the interviews, what I'm looking for is, I said this before, but I'm looking for two things. I'm looking for enthusiasm and what they're actually spending their time doing. So when we were talking about anchoring earlier, where that comes into play is if I'm interviewing somebody, I will throw out these broad questions like, oh, what projects did you work on recently? And they'll say, oh, I worked on X. And I said, oh, what was your favorite part? And I'm basically distilling down what to them is the most memorable part and what they're going to talk about the most. Because if somebody enjoyed something, they're going to be ecstatically, oh, we did this thing and had a cool shader and I did all this stuff and I had like, oh, it was great. it's like, okay, so they like shaders. That's like that. I now know where they would want to fit in and where their most use will be, what they'll put the most resources into. But if you was like, oh, what did you work on? Oh, we had a thing and it had a database in it. It's like, oh, well, what did you do? I don't know. Someone else on the team did that. It's like, okay, so the databases aren't their thing, right? So I'm just trying to distill very quickly what those answers are. And so when it comes to that kind of anchoring, a good interviewer will be asking you broad questions, not to stump you or confuse you, but to get to those answers, right? To find where you want to be, because that'll help you both have better resources,
Yeah.
Definitely true. So I'm going to take one more question. There are a couple other things in chat I want to just talk about real quick afterwards, and then I think we start wrapping it up. We're getting close to noon over here. So this question was, do you guys use Agile in game dev? If so, what's your average sprint size? What do your sprint rituals look like, stand up and retro? And I'll answer it first because I've gone through this in a couple of different scenarios. I'd say probably about half of the time, half of the projects I've worked on, we actually had somewhat of an agile system where we were going through sprints with retrospectives and stand-ups and stuff. Especially at Sony early on when that started to become a thing, kind of, I guess, early 2000s, it was kind of like a big boom of this agile craze and whiteboards and everything else. And we did quite a bit of that. And they would generally be like 2 weeks with a stand up every day and then a quick retro at the end of the 2 week period. Most of the time, the retrospectives were relatively useless. Very few places I've seen have done like a good retrospective where we did more than just like see what everybody else had done and reiterate what went wrong. The good ones, we actually find solutions to things, try to automate things and fix problems. But I would say that's maybe like, 1 out of 4 projects I work on is like that with the retros. But the sprints generally tend to be all about the same, and about half the companies or half the projects, not even companies, didn't necessarily stick so well to an agile, and the other half were right on it. What about you guys?
So one thing I actually wanted to bring up earlier when we talked about projects is that first off, let me answer the second question and then I'll come back to this. But I think stand-up isn't even related to agile or sprints. It's a thing you do for the team to make sure everybody is caught up and to see the perspectives so everyone can respect each other in the terms of work and help each other if needed. Because stand-ups are supposed to be quick, on the point that you say, hey, I'm working on this today, I worked on that before, and when I'm working on this today, I might have a problem which someone else can help me because X. And you don't want that to last too long. So for us, it's just a channel in our Slack that everybody posts the message as soon as they clock in. Yesterday today I, issue is or problems, list them out. If you say anyone's name, they follow through in a chat after. But it's that short for us, the stand-up. Everybody can read this, everyone can react. We don't do this in person because the company works entirely remotely. Now, on the first thing about sprints and making them better, as you said, automate, I sent a video about making projects work great in general, and that's one of the best videos I've found on the topic, which is just fantastic, and I recommend everybody watch this. It talks about waste when you work, and it has the cycle of waste, which is a great concept that, reflecting on Terraria, happened a lot. And it talks about the game industry's heroics or the unfavorable times of crunch and how you can avoid them and all the things that you should probably pay attention to as you work. And it also talks about sprinting and the best practices as you work on that. Do give it a time if you face any struggles on this. Really
I'm going to add this to my watch later list.
I tried to add it to my watch later list and realized it's on my watch later list already. So.
Oh. Nice. This pops up for me in bed every time I go in. Like, oh, here's what's coming on tonight.
So yeah, I really recommend this. I cannot recommend it enough. I had the team watch this as we started working on the next projects, and yeah, there we go. The cycle of waste. He talks about every single line connection here, and it's really worth to pay attention to. He also talks about how to solve this, which is fantastic.
Yeah, this sounds like a really good one. I'm definitely watching it. I'm gonna hit thumbs up on it right now beforehand. Go pre thumbs up it so that I'm ready, and everybody else can remember to hit thumbs up while they're watching the stream. Yeah, this looks really good though.
Unfortunately, my favorite recommendation video, the one that taught me the most about project management stuff, is a Bob Martin video on his website. That's a paywall single video. So it's also like it's in the middle of a larger video in a numbered section. It's very hard to get a reference to. So unfortunately, it's one that it's basically talks about how to set up a project and all that stuff. But to kind of go back to the question about agile in general, the problem is anything that gets sufficiently popular becomes an industry. And once an industry is born, there's motivations and reasons for people to sell you stuff about it and to make material and to make it interesting. And you may not think of it as a sexy topic, but somebody somewhere found agile to be an interesting enough idea to start spinning up companies and books and meetings and events and trade shows and everything else and all the other stuff around it. So I think if you separate the point from all of the fanciness and all of the decks of planning poker cards and other purchasable things you can get, as a premise, agile I think is universally better than waterfall in every conceivable way when it comes to delivering projects. I don't think that's too contentious a point these days. I think people have universally agreed that software changes, and it changes regularly, and oftentimes objectives change. And if you don't stop and take the temperature of a project and ask if your burn down rate is successful and if you're still on track for whatever you're trying to deliver, and if you haven't decided to change your mind based on what you've learned, you're doomed to repeat history. So in short, yes, and everything I ever do, I try to do agile. The question becomes how much of the performative aspects, which some are beneficial, some aren't, do I actually do? Stand-ups, I think, again, just like Roger said, everyone does them. I think if you don't do a stand-up, you're missing out. There's no negative downside there's no negatives to just take stock of what your team's doing, what everyone's working on, and that starts your day well. It keeps everybody on track for what's going on. The later stuff, though, retros and stuff, sometimes are useful. If there is something to be learned, then do a retro.
I just want to touch. There is no harm in doing stand-ups. There is harm in doing stand-ups wrong. So pay attention to what you're doing.
Yes, yeah, and again, like, it's in the name. Stand-up, like it's quick. It's just to get it out of the way.
Yeah, it was covered in a previous game dev show. So if you're interested, make sure to find it and listen to it.
Yeah, my first experience with stand-ups was one of those done wrongs where we were up there for like 45 minutes standing, listening to people talk for 20 minutes straight, like about some technical thing that nobody, like two people are having a conversation and 20 are watching. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I think the problem is it again, it comes down to performatism. Like I find a lot of it boils down to, and anybody who's watched me talk about code has probably gotten this idea, hopefully. I like to ask myself the why of everything I'm doing. If I'm writing a line of code, I'm not doing it because that's what the book said or that's what the prevailing theory is. And the same goes for business. If you hear big companies use agile, and to do agile you do a stand-up, and stand-ups are done this way, like I have genuinely been on stand-up meetings where people will end their sentence with, and I have no blocking issues. And then as soon as everyone's finished talking, they say, oh, by the way, I need to talk to you about this. I'm stuck on this problem. It's like, well, why did you... So it's forget about catchphrases and all the other stuff and just sort of, actually ask yourself if it's adding value. And the general idea is when you're working with a team of people, you want to see things coming up fast by asking everybody, is anybody stuck? Does anyone need help? You start working on the project and you work for as long as you can get away with until something breaks or something needs to change, and you stop and ask yourself, are we still on the right track? Forget about all the business side and look at it as a life metaphor. If you're walking down a path to try to get to a destination, and if you don't stop every few minutes and go, are we still going in the right direction? Or did we just take a wrong turn? Like, that's all you're doing. You're just stopping and going, are we still going in the right direction? Is there any concerns? Does anybody need to go to the bathroom? Do we need to stop here? We're about to pass a restaurant. Anybody want any food? Like, that's all you're doing. You're stopping along the project and saying, do we need this? Everyone okay? Are we still going? Any problems? Let's stop and resolve them. Still going in the right direction? We made it to our destination. Are we still planning on going there? Good. Let's keep going. Just like that's all this fancy buzzwords and stuff really boils down to. It's managing the flow of the project so it delivers on time.
Yeah, what's helped me a lot in some successful ones. It just kind of popped in my head was where we had whiteboards that actually had the tasks with the states that we were doing, just like a Trello board, but having a physical board or a visual electronic one that we were going along with while we were doing it. So while we were doing the stand up, actually having the items there that we were going to talk about. And if there was something that we were going to talk about that wasn't on the board, we should go add a thing for it, because it probably should be there. If it's something that we're working on, it should have been up on the board as something that we're doing. So it made it easy to go through and look and not miss anything, because you just go like item by item down on the board, like, hey, these are Jason's items, hey, these are Salim's items, whatever. Go through them, and if there's something that they wanted to talk about, it should be on that board. And if they want to talk about it, it's not on there, then it's just something that didn't get tracked. So we'd add it on, and that helped a lot. And I would say that those were some of the most when I talk about like efficient stand-ups where things went really fast and there wasn't a lot of wasted time, a lot of confusion and discussion. Those are some of the best. I think that visual aid of exactly what we were going to be covering and what was coming helped a lot.
I agree, but I have a hot take. This is a personal thing from my own experience that I'm very cautious about this. I think one mistake that can happen in a company is over transparency, because what happens is, and you have to really be careful about this, the team works at different fidelities. If your stand-up meeting isn't the developer stand-up meeting, but like the morning company stand-up meeting, you will have managers and QA and devs and artists and everybody who's there just to make sure everyone's on track. If you bring something up, or if you have a board saying what you're doing, everybody's filtering that through their own lens. And so I have had entire meetings derail because someone says, "Oh, I'm working on the API for this thing." And they're like, "Oh no, it doesn't work that way." It's like, no, that's not. It's not. This isn't for you. This is for them. It's like, yeah, but we need this thing. No, it's a different. You're talking. API means something different for the consumer of the API versus the person. Like, we're not talking about that. And suddenly, like, a whole day is lost in confusion and whatever. So personally, this is just something that I do. I don't know if I recommend it, but it works for me. I will figure out what the ticket items are, and we will say, I'm working on the saving system, and the feature I am adding is the ability to load a file by version number. But then all of the subtasks for that, I just hide in the box over here. I write my own to-do list, and I work on all that stuff. And then if anybody ever asks me, I can show them. And if you're working with devs, that's easier. Like if you have a team of people you work with, you can have the devy tech stuff on the wall. But make sure to not, if you're ever in a stand-up meeting and someone asks what you're doing, don't say, "Oh, well, the serializer has this issue where whenever I try to load a JSON object, it's got a vector 3 in it, it does this weird cyclical." Like, don't do that. Don't ever like start to divulge the work details you're doing, because what you'll do is you'll derail everybody, and nobody finds that useful. So be very clear about the fidelity at which you're talking, who you're talking to, and what the meetings are for.
Yeah, there's also not including noise in your messages, because message to noise ratio. Signal to noise, sorry.
Yeah. It's easy to just distract and stuff. I totally agree. And I think in general, when I'm thinking of those cards, they're kind of at the higher level. And the meetings are almost always, I think your meetings have to be, if you're going to do stand-ups, they have to be team specific to the point where people are working together. The kind of meetings where you have the separate teams coming together, that needs to be something different, something that's not the same, because your goal is different. Your goal is just to share status, not so much to look for blocking issues and check for any
because
change in direction.
Like this is one of my favorite, like this biggest life lessons working with teams is when I migrated from working as just a dev to working in more managerial stuff. I learned a really mind-blowing little detail, which is programmers think out loud a lot of the time, and they're trying to solve problems. So if you're working on a piece of code and it's not working, you can quite logically say to yourself, "Oh, this is not working. There is an issue. I need to solve the issue." Now, if you say that, what you're saying to yourself subconsciously is, "I will have to spend an hour doing some Googling, possibly poking some code, and I'll fix it. No big deal. It's a frustration, but it's not limiting or changing my day plan. It's maybe putting me off a bit. But because I correctly scoped for a few hours, it won't affect anything else going forward, unless it turns out to be bigger than like in a couple of hours." If you're in a stand-up meeting and you say, "This thing, the save system doesn't work," somebody who has no concept of what you're doing, you've just said, "Oh, the game, the ability to save things, that's gone now. We've lost saving. Saving is broken." And they're no like, more. Alarm bells are going off. They're freaking out. They're like, "Wait, what do you mean? Can we get more people? Do you need help with like?" It's like, no. What I mean is, there's a small thing I need to just check the format of the file before. So that is such a dangerous thing to do, is to not see it from the perspective of people that you're working with. So talking about blocking
to go
issues,
fix
yeah,
the save system. Like,
exactly.
hey Jason, we're gonna have a meeting now to fix that save system. We called everybody in. What's going on?
So fidelity, like I cannot stress enough how important it is to say on the board, say today we're working on this thing, and if someone asks you, is there issues, you could say, oh, there's a couple of things I need help with. I'll need to reach out to person X. And they're like, cool. From their perspective, you're like, oh, they just need more hands on deck for this one. That's all they need to know. And then when you go to that person, you're like, right, okay, I need a bit of help. The save thing isn't working. Could you check your format? That's fine. But you really want to make sure for yourself that you don't cause panic, right?
It's funny how you say that programmers think out loud and try to solve the problems out loud too, because it reminded me. I was talking to my friend yesterday. I forget what he was complaining about. And I'm like, well, why do you do this? Why do you do this? And he's like, why do you guys have a fucking solution for everything? Like, every time I tell you something, try to give me an answer. And I realize I do that to my wife too. Like, no matter what it is, I'm just like out loud, like talking through the possibilities. And then she's like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do? I'm like, I don't know. I'm just talking out all the options out loud. Like, thinking of like all the solutions that we could do. Like, I don't know which one's right. I just like to talk about.
And again, and to be honest, I do that too. I think a lot of people do. But what really the worst part too is, well, I love rubber ducking, and I would do happily like reason it out and try to solve it. Sometimes I'll just be venting about a problem to a friend of mine who isn't a programmer, and so I'll be like, this bloody thing and this thing, and then they're genuinely trying to help. But they're like, have you tried this? Like, you're like 80 levels evolved from we're that's not even. Have
you tried using Unreal?
Yeah, it's like I really appreciate you trying to help, but like so I've learned it's more valuable for me to just like not engage in that conversation, because I know they're earnestly going to try to help, but they're going to give me useless suggestions, absolutely mind-blowingly useless suggestions. So unless I'm willing to accept that, yeah.
One thing I wanted to touch on is that when you do the stand-up and you're trying to signal things properly to people, and the fidelity that you mentioned, one thing that's important is that you want to say what you want to do, not what the current state is. Because when you say what the current state is, you're opening it up to interpretation from others, and that interpretation can be different and more catastrophic than you made it sound. But more importantly, you're making them do extra work for something that they don't need to, because you already know what you want to happen. You can just say what you want to happen instead. So that's a big thing that helped a lot in our case. So instead of saying the system doesn't work, say, I want X's help with this system.
Yeah, and if you want to go one step further for that, if you're doing so if you're doing project management and you're talking about use cases, this goes for people who are moving into that more managerial position. Forget about yourself and your job going down and look at your job going up. If somebody is a financier or a product owner or something, they don't think in terms of code, they think in terms of features. Does it do X? Does it do Y? Will it do X? Will it do Y? And so all they want to hear is, I'm working on the ability to, and it will do X or it will do Y. So don't talk about save systems or persistent systems, because like to you, a system might cross two boundaries, and maybe when you say save system, you're talking about the part that talks to the objects, not the part that saves the files. And so you might say later, I'm working on the file, the file system or the file management system, and they're like, well, how is that? What does that do with it? It's like you're getting into weird territory there. So talk to people who are up that level higher than you with, we are working on the ability to load files or the ability to change your character's skin or customize whatever. And if you describe it in those terms, you can then trickle that down into lower details.
Cool. Well, guys, I think we're just about out of time, so we'll start wrapping it up. Was there anything else you guys wanted to share the last second before we head out? Any videos, streams, or upcoming stuff for news? Andrew's always got something, and we missed him. So I'm sure Andrew has something. Go check out his.
I do think he's actually he set up some thing for his stream. So if you go to Andrew's channel, he's actually got a stream or two set. You can mark to be reminded of the moment.
Nice. Yeah, go check those out. Check out all the links down below, some courses, and Jason's YouTube channel. Lots of other fun stuff. And then I guess we'll just be back here next Sunday. You guys can both be back next Sunday, maybe? Yeah.
Hopefully. Also, just in case it helps anyone, there's a Unity asset refresh sale right now for 50% off on many things, so might be worth taking a look at sometime.
Oh, so is that up on the asset store now?
Yeah, right now.
To go check that out too. I'll drop a link for that in the description too for anybody. But
Oh,
I mean, just go to the asset store, you probably find it. What's up?
And so someone said, any quick tips? Well, here's a very quick one because it's new to me. I mentioned in a previous video how I use something called Search Everything, which is this amazing search tool. And somebody commented on that video saying they use something called Beyond Compare. I had never heard of that before. And so I installed it. And among other things, it gives you a clipboard which stores all of your last previous clipboarded things. So if you want to go back, you can click it and find whatever your previous. It's amazing. So that's another piece of software that has now made it onto my computer in perpetuity. It's called Beyond Compare.
I've used it for
Nice.
diffs quite a few times. It's really cool. Not free
One
though,
tip.
right?
Some of the features are, I think, but I'm going to buy it. It's definitely going to make my life better.
So go ahead, Yara. You had something?
Yeah, I have a small tip that actually came up recently this week. In Unity, there are tags, and most people think don't use them. They're strings. You're comparing strings. Not good for anything. There's one of them that's actually very important, and it's called the editor only tag. And this tag says this game object will not exist in your builds. And that's super useful for your debug scripts, for all your calls, for anything that you want just for presentation to make development easier for you, that you not take the cost during the build. This tag used to have a problem where it didn't work with prefabs, but that's fixed now. So it's very useful, and I don't see it talked about enough. So
yeah, that's
there you
one
go.
I always
But
forget
it is
exists.
worth noting, it can also cause you issues if you drag a reference to an object that has that tag on it when you make your build, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, the debug print screen isn't there anymore, or the FPS display I had is yeah. So make sure you're hyper aware that imagine if it gets deleted just before the game builds. That's what it says.
Yeah.
Don't reference it from things that aren't also using that tag, I guess. But yeah, that's a good one. I forget about that one a lot. That it's there. It's definitely something that's useful. Have you used that quite a bit, or you just
So I actually didn't use it almost at all, but then again, I only build hobby projects. A friend of mine had a problem, and then it came up, and I was like, "Oh yeah, that exists." And then I made sure to check it out with a few builds of mine, and like, can I break this? Can I break that? Can I break this? Can I break that? And it all worked perfectly okay to expectations. So I was pleasantly surprised because I remembered it very differently.
yeah, I'm glad you reminded me of that one. I'm gonna start using it again.
I will say though, personal caution. I don't like using it too much. I will use it for things. Like, perfect example being like an overlay thing for which version of the build you're on or something. If you want like a literal big rectangle that says this is the debug version for whatever. But I find that I prefer using somewhere in code an if def that switches on two different objects, because that way at least it's hard coded in code where that happens. There's a general conversation about coding by convention. I always get worried where it's like, oh, the convention is if you do X, this magic will happen. Whenever that's the case, people who don't know that that's happening will get confused. So that's fine if it's your projects, but if you're giving people some work, having things that'll just magically kill itself by the time the project starts, you're like, oh, okay, how do I, you know what I mean? Like people can get a little bit confused about stuff like that.
All right, guys. Well, thanks again, and thanks everybody for coming out and joining us. Thanks, Paul, for the super chat of the hippo. It looks much better in YouTube than it does on the stream.
I love that, by the way. I love the fact that it's a new random sentence I have to read through and go, what does it look like?
Hippo character going really fast on a chair, propelling across the room. Yeah, it's great. I love him too. I would love to see the animation, but I think the text makes me laugh a little bit more. So then I got to jump over to actually look at it. All right, but yeah, thanks again, everybody, for coming out and joining us. Please hit the like button, the subscribe, and just go share the stream somewhere. Drop it on Facebook or Instagram.
Sorry, the comments are coming in, so I can't help it. One last thing was the Tesseract said all code is convention. It said no, very specifically the term code by convention has a very particular meaning. An example of this is in Unity when you use void awake, and despite being a private method that has no visible external anything calling it, it magically gets called. That's code by convention. If you follow this convention, magic happens. That's not the same as things being a convention. So just putting that out there.
There are some times when it's good though, like with Unity's mono behaviors, it actually makes a lot of sense and it's relatively good.
Yeah.
Or with a lot of database mapping, will do that for keys and IDs and stuff to just kind of simplify that. Or at least in the old versions, my buddy Matt was telling me that or no, I think it was Paul was telling me the latest version of Entity Framework stopped doing that. He had to do a whole refactor because of it, because they got rid of the convention, probably because people run into the same kind of issues that you kind of loosely alluded to, which as soon as the convention changes or somebody renames something, things don't work and they don't know why. So, all right,
there's
I'm
also
gonna shut up
yeah.
now. Go ahead, Yari.
I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that also Mirror and Photon use their attributes, and they weave code to touch the things that you wanted to magically work for you. So that's another convention that they set up for you. It's really nice to figure out
saying
how
it's
to make
bad.
it.
Yeah, it can be good. It's just you have to know it exists. The difference is if you use any code by convention, people need to know the conventions, and that can lead to issues. If you're working with a team and everyone knows the conventions, it's amazing. It's just you have to make sure that's very clear.
Yeah, tends to work a lot better with frameworks and libraries where you're kind of buying into and accepting that than parts of your game that you just built yourself, and people have to kind of understand and know. So, all right, well, thanks again, everybody. Thanks for joining us out there, everyone. Again, please hit all the buttons and all that stuff, and I guess we will see you again next week.
Yeah, see you.
Good luck.